lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSIN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in segment number 2 by a good friend of ours from the network, Ben Stevens. He does such a great job on Live Bet Saturday. He does such a great job taking a look at college football, college basketball. We're going to be chatting it up with him about what we've all seen from these conferences thus far this season. A little bit of a divide that we're starting to have between the haves and the have-nots in college basketball. Really, those top 4 teams that we are seeing in terms of challenging themselves and getting the job done in the final segment. We're going to get you guys picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Wednesday as we hit some bank shots, and going to talk to Ben about some of these games that we've got for Wednesday as well. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUDet_81. Keep in mind, Larcy, how many me does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire into whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by Better. That is BETR on Better. They are making it better to be able to dive in on some daily fantasy by giving you guys $10 free. All you need to do is go to BETR.app, type in the promo code of VSINPOD, that is VSINPOD. That gets you $10 to get all started. All you need to do is take a look at a player's stat line, determine whether or not they're going to go over and under, and you're all good to go. And we're all good to go to take a look back at what we saw in a fun college basketball Tuesday. Try to find some trends and try to get to know these teams a little bit better.
Games from yesterday is Greg buzzing about. Here is the rowdy recap.
Michigan continuing to look very dominant. 89-61. They completely dump trucked Villanova. Villanova 9-37 from 3, and it's not like Michigan shot it well from 3 either. 9 of 33 from the outside. Devin Askew off the bench for Villanova. He did go 5 of 13 from 3-point range, but for Michigan, they pulverized Villanova on the glass 53-33. Duke Brandon has been one of the top rebounders in all of college basketball. 5.6 boards as Morris Johnson actually led the way for Michigan. He had 10 rebounds. Ade Mera, 11 points, 8 rebounds. Yaxel Lindeborg, he had 9 points and 3 rebounds. He really didn't even do a ton, and yet this Michigan team went out there completely dominated. That's what we've been seeing out of them pretty much ever since that TCU game. And then you did see in terms of Big Ten Conference play, and we're going to talk about that with our good friend Ben Stevens as well. Illinois be able to take it to the Ohio State University, 88-80. The finalists for Ohio State, they only go 9 of 28 from 3, and for Illinois, 11 of 27 from 3 with David Marosic going 4 of 5 from the outside for 22 points. Keaton Wagler was able to supply 23 points, and for Illinois, they win the rebound battle 37-30 as Illinois also won 29 out of 32 at the free throw line. So they were able to knock down their free throws. For BYU, they just barely escape against Clemson, 67-64 the finals. BYU got down 21 points at the half. Just a Herculean run by them to be able to come back and win this game. And I have to do the math to make sure that I get it correct in terms of how big this lead got. But I believe the largest lead in this game for Clemson was 22 points. So that was a little bit of an upchucking from them. But that said, for BYU, they persevered despite going just 5 of 23 from 3-point range. They lost the rebound battle 38-36, but what BYU did a nice job of winning the turnover battle 12-9 against a Clemson team that has been one of the best at taking care of the ball. Justin Porter, 17 points for Clemson, but BYU had on their side AJ DeBansa, who was able to supply 28 points, and he powers the team to victory. Also being able to be powered to victory was Virginia, though they do not get the cover against Maryland Eastern Shore, 84-60 the final. Maryland Eastern Shore has covered against some good teams, by the way, but for Virginia, 13 out of 31 from 3-point range. Balanced effort. Sam Lewis led the way with 15 points, and Maryland Eastern Shore, not a shock here. They lose the turnover battle 15-7, but hey, they were able to do a solid job on the glass. They only lost that battle 32-29, so nice quality cover as an over 30-point underdog. If you, like me, at UMBC, this was a rough one. UMBC was up 7 points with a minute and 50 seconds remaining, and they lose 83-79. They upchucked a feat from the jaws of victory as for Buffalo, 7 of 17 from 3. They shoot 55% from the floor. And for UMBC, they did a nice job in terms of hitting all their free throws. They go 8 of 8 at the charity stripe, but lost a battle on the boards, 27-25. I know there were some people that were upset with the officiating in this game, but you can't afford to let yourself not score a single point in the final minute and 50 seconds when you're up 7. So that was on them. For Kentucky, they are strangely unranked right now, but they did restore a little bit of order against NC Central. They don't quite get the cover on the north of 38-point spread, but 103-67. Offense looked much better in this one. 12 of 29 from three-point range for Kentucky. Otega Owe looked inspired in this one, 21 points. And Jasper Johnson off the bench, 22 points as for NC Central. They themselves did a relatively solid job from the floor. They do lose the turnover battle 13-9, and they do lose their rebound battle 36-26, but they go 6 of 19 from three-point range. Gage Lattimore, 14 points. So if you had the massive gob ton of points with NC Central, you were able to get there. We saw some big scores from the late night games as well. How about Indiana just absolutely lambasting Penn State? 113-72 as for Indiana, 17 out of 31 from 3. Lamar Wilkerson, 44 points on 10 of 15 3-point shooting. Like Tucker DeVries only had 12 points in this game, but it did not matter. And for Penn State, they have been very good at taking care of the ball this year. They lose the turnover battle 14-10. They lose the rebound battle 28-21. And for Indiana, they shoot 69% from the floor, so that was very, very nice for Wyoming. They win 106-79 over South Dakota. As for South Dakota, they do go 8 of 19 from 3, and Wyoming 9 of 19 from 3, but for Wyoming, they shoot 63% from the floor. They win the rebound battle 36-26, and Nasir Meyer, 26 big points, and Demarion Dennis off the bench, he was able to supply 21 as well, so a nice performance out there from Wyoming. And how about another nice performance from Colorado State? You figured that their 45.9% three-point shooting would regress a little bit, but even with that, they win 76-55 over Dartmouth. Now the spread was 19.5, 20 in some spots, so weren't able to quite get there, but 7 of 18 from three-point range for Colorado State. You had all but one starter be able to score double figures, and Colorado State, contrary to popular belief, they're actually one of the slowest teams in college basketball right now in terms of total possessions per game, so a nice quality winner there. Things have been tumultuous for DePaul to say the least, but they got a nice quality winner over Morgan State, 92-49. They got a 46 of 15 at the half, as for DePaul, 11 of 22 from three-point range. They go 29 out of 37 at the free throw line off the bench. Caleb Banks, well, he banked it in for a nice 18 points, so that was a nice quality winner for them. And Arizona State, they take it to Northern Arizona, 73-48. The Lumberjacks get chopped down as the Lumberjacks, 5 of 26 from three-point range. And for Arizona State, they win the rebound battle 41-25. Masamba Diop, he was able to supply 19 big points in this one. So Arizona State, nice quality winner there behind some good rock-solid defense. And this game is just coming to a close as I do this podcast. I do have to have this up by midnight Pacific, 3 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time. USC trying to be able to get that cover against San Diego. A lot of places had this as about a 14.5 point line. As of right now, you're looking at USC being up 94-79, and it looks like that's how this game is going to finish. As for USC, they go 9 of 15 from three-point range. Ezra Usar was able to supply 29 points. Chad Baker-Mazara, 31 points. And for San Diego, they have been getting line-based on the glass this year. They lose that rebound battle by kind of 38-30, and for San Diego, they only go 9 of 30 from three-point range. The USC did have 21 turnovers in this one compared to San Diego's 12, and San Diego actually did get a late bucket. So 94-81, San Diego does get that cover, so a little bit of a revision there, but still very good performance from USC. They were able to cash you another nice quality over out there, so they did a nice job being able to get that nice solid cover. And right now, as I'm doing this, Cal is in a dogfight against Dominican of California, D2 school. They were down 31-28 at the half. They're currently restoring a little bit of order out there, but that's not what you want to see. But if you're West Virginia, this is what you want to see. 90-58. They completely take it to Little Rock. Little Rock was so good on defense last year, and they just have not been this year. Han Ruff, he huffed and puffed, and he went 8 of 11 from three-point range for 24 points. You had West Virginia's Hole go 15 out of 30 from 3-point. Trayson Eaglestaff, who's been a disappointment here to begin the season, well, not disappointing on this day. 23 big points. West Virginia 42-29. They win the rebound battle, so that was a good quality performance there. And then it wasn't necessarily comfortable, but you had McNeese be able to go on the road. They get the job done against Rhode Island by a kind of 66-64. Defense continues to be rock solid for them, as Rhode Island just 5 of 18 from 3-point. And Rhode Island did go 23 of 27 at the free throw line, but they lost the turnover battle 21-11. And in your deplorable performance of the night, that would go to Ryder, as coming into the night, Bucknell had been 320th in all of college basketball in terms of points per possession allowed, and Bucknell won this game 51-38. That was not a halftime score. That was a final score, as Bucknell was up 26-16 at the half. For Ryder, 3 of 13 from 3, 15 turnovers, and 16 made field goals. For Bucknell, Archley Spendone was able to supply 14 points. Lone guy in this game that scored double figures. That was a sad, sad game for anyone that watched. I do salute you, because, man, that was rough to say the least, but this was a little bit more pleasant, as Brown, they get a cover, but they aren't able to pull off the outright win against Providence, 86-79. The final, as Providence has been a very good over team to begin the season. As for Providence, 8 of 26 from 3. He had a 1 of 11 3-point shooting performance from Stefan Vox. I have no idea why he was going 1 of 11 from 3, but he decided to hoist up a bunch of threes that helped out Brown, who they do lose the rebound battle 44-33, but Brown wins the turnover battle 14-10. So nice quality cover there from the Brown Bears, and doing this as we are reaching sort of that conclusion of the UConn versus Florida game. Again, do have to have this up by midnight Pacific, 3 o'clock a.m. Eastern. As I'm doing this, UConn has a 66-62 lead with about 3 minutes and change remaining. UConn was up 39-32 at the half, and for Florida, they have gotten nothing off their bench. As I'm doing this with 3 minutes remaining in the game, they have gotten a grand total 4 points off their bench, but you have seen Xavier Lee be able to come on strong. As I'm doing this, he's up to 19 points. Florida just 3 of 13 from 3. They're very much looking to pile drive the ball down low, and they're currently out-rebounding UConn by 9, but UConn solo ball 15 points in the first 37 minutes of this game. Looks like UConn should be able to get the job done. I know that they had a great crowd out there at MSG, but you'll know the result by the time that this uploads. And if you're taking a look at trend-wise what we're getting in college basketball right now, it very much has been a lean to the under thus far this season, though we are starting to see some more overs. The under rate is 50.8%, 785 unders to 760 overs. Favorites just continue to cash. They're covering 51.5% of spreads, 793, 747, and 23 against the spread, with 1 or 2 games still pending from Tuesday. And if you look at the last 7 days in college basketball, the over rate is darn near 52%, 132 overs to 123 unders, with favorites hitting at nearly 55%, 139, 114, and 5 against the spread. So that's where we're seeing college basketball right now, and that's what we're all getting trend-wise. Coming next, how about if we talk about some Big Ten conference play, talk about what we're seeing in terms of these conferences, and so much more with our good friend in Ben Stevens on the Flip Side right here on Subscription. With myself, Greg Peters, and now a part of the VSIN Family Podcast. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSIN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSIN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word, .com. For anyone that is new to VSIN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSIN, because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSIN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSIN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSIN. And we're back your lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSIN family podcast. Always great to be joined by this man, as we've got Ben Stevens aboard. He does such tremendous work here at VSIN, always on the weekends with our live bet Saturday shows, taking a look at college football and college basketball. He's dialed in on a little bit of everything, and much like myself, he's got a little bit of Big Ten running through his veins, as you're able to follow him on the old Twitter side checks at Ben Scott Stevens altogether. And Ben, it's great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Greg, very glad to be here as always as college football winds down, of course, with bowl season and the college football playoff on the horizon. A lot more focused on college basketball. We've got some conference action picking up, and outside of the MTEs and the early non-con tournaments, some pretty good standalone marquee non-conference matchups as well.
Yep, absolutely. And just how have you taken a look at this first month plus of the season? Because I do think that what we've gotten here thus far has been a divide between the haves and the have-nots. I don't think that there's one or two runaway teams quite yet, though what Michigan has been able to do is quite solid. But I look at sort of those big four, and Iowa State, Michigan, Arizona, and Duke as being the creme de la creme teams. And then you sort of have that tier two of the likes of Gonzaga, Purdue, and UConn that haven't lost to those top four teams.
Yeah, I really think, Greg, you kind of hit the nail on the head right now. I do think there are some really good teams, 8 to 10 probably, that are kind of excelling above the rest. We are seeing Michigan steamroll teams consecutively. We are seeing Michigan win against the top teams in the country and against power conference programs by 30 and 40 plus. It has been remarkable to see, but I think you are seeing some really good balance among the 8 to 10 best teams, whether you look at the net rankings, whether you're paying attention to Ken Palmer, of course, in the AP top 25, you're seeing some really quality teams off to a very good start. And one of the great things about college basketball is you get those marquee non-conference matchups early in the year to compare best against best, brand against brand, premier program against premier program. And we're starting to see some of those elevations as well. Iowa State going into Mackey and winning by 30-plus points was sensational on Saturday. But you're seeing some teams even like Alabama off to maybe in some of the bigger matchups, a slower start, but still looking formidable as one of those 10 best teams in the country. So there's a lot of balance at the top with some really, really good basketball, but not, as you alluded to, like the 2021 season when it was Baylor and Gonzaga and everybody else.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that it's going to be a lot of fun once we get into a little bit more conference play with these teams, because I really do feel like this year we have seen the SEC take a little bit of a step back. As a matter of fact, right now with the SEC, you don't really have a single one of those teams in the top 10, though Vanderbilt, I think that you could make a little bit of a case for them right now. But I mean, the Big 10 has really been able to step up. The Big 12 has really stepped up. And I think that they have formed themselves as the two premier conferences in college basketball this season.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think the Big Ten has a ton of depth at this moment, and I even think the team that I expect to win a national championship or have a national championship bet on from way back in April when we learned that Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Renn and the addition of Oscar Clough and everybody was making their way to West Lafayette, that ticket is on the Boilermakers. But right at this moment, they're not the best team in the Big Ten Conference. That is certainly Michigan for what they have done in the outstanding non-conference play that we have seen for Dusty May. And, of course, in a players' era, dominance and impressive victories by a supreme margin more than we have ever seen. But I think there's some really good teams outside of that. Michigan State has looked fantastic in the early going. Illinois is high-flying and offensively excellent. Some really good teams in that conference. ACC has some powerhouses, and the Big 12 is going to be one to reckon with, as we know. When you have the likes of Iowa State continuing to pull off what they have done and the consistency under TJ Otzelberger, but of course, Houston, Kansas finding its footing. BYU will always be exciting. Really good conferences, Gray, like you mentioned, across the nation, really kind of topping the class in college basketball so far.
Yes, absolutely. And I do think that it's going to be a lot of fun. What we do get in terms of Big Ten Conference players, we do have a few Big Ten Conference games that are going to be going down on Wednesday, and I'll certainly ask you about the Wisconsin versus Nebraska game here in a second. But that said, how do you take a look at these conference games right now as compared to, we're going to call it after Christmas, because you get a few games just before the new year in a lot of these conferences. That's when you have a nice clean break from non-conference play to conference play. But I always think it's a little bit wonky when you've got these conferences like the Big West, the Big Ten, the Metro Atlantic that play these like 2 or 3 non-conference games here in early December. They go back into non-conference play, and then they go back into conference play.
Yeah, Greg, it's a great point, especially around the holidays, right? When students elsewhere around campus are starting to depart for a long break, and it's really just a focus on basketball, especially as you get closer to around Christmas and New Year's time. The Big Ten's been doing this with their 2 non-conference kind of their 2 conference standalone games in the month of December since 2017, and yet it does not feel like it is now nearly at a decade. It still feels kind of new and unique, at least at the highest level of men's college basketball. So it's definitely a different feeling. It's still teams, I think, learning and growing early in the year, matching up to find a little bit of a litmus test in conference action, but still very much in the way that coaches discuss non-conference games and wanting to play against the best early in November, early in December to kind of see where they stand and where they need to improve and grow throughout the year. I still think that's the same thing, even if you are playing against a Big Ten school you might see later in February or January or March, of course. So I still think it's still early in the year. It's still about learning what your team has, where you excel, where you need to improve, all of that, even if it's a conference foe on the other side.
Absolutely. As Ben Stevens, he does such great work here at VSIN. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Ben, we do have ourselves a really good one. It's going to be Nebraska going up against Wisconsin. If I'm not mistaken, you've got a little bit of Nebraska in you. I'm someone that grew up in the great state of Wisconsin, so this is going to be a good one. Right now, Wisconsin, that slim, 1.5 point favorite with a total of 159 or so. I want to get your thoughts here because I personally look at the home and road splits of Wisconsin, and I think that this is a very concerning spot for them. And we both know how difficult it is to win on the road in the Big Ten, even if it might be a little bit of a wonkier game where you might not have as many students on campus. Personally, I think that the wrong team is favored here.
Yeah, I really do kind of agree with you, Greg, and I think Nebraska is going to start to solidify that notion. A couple of marquee victories, at least in non-con play, against bigger programs like in Oklahoma, like a K-State, of course, Creighton, but Creighton having a down year, winning by 21 to keep the state of Nebraska red, as they like to say. The Huskers with the nation's longest active win streak, heavy as the head that wears the crown, 13 consecutive for Fred Hoiberg and his Huskers. And I think the development that we have seen for Nebraska, basically in every single phase, and how the offensive flow has started to look so much better for Nebraska this year. The additions of Price Sanford have been incredible. But I also think that the young freshman in Braden Frager has been so good this year, and what he has done in spacing out the floor and having rink mass back is going to be just huge for Nebraska throughout this season. I do lean to Nebraska in this game. I do think it could be competitive. I think it could be decided by just a few possessions as we get to the under 4-minute media timeout late in that second half. But if we're looking right now, Greg, like you said, Wisconsin maybe a slight pick'em favorite, maybe a 1.5. The Ken Palm projection has Wisconsin winning by 1, basically what we're going to see from the betting spread perspective as well. I'd probably lean with the slight home underdog at the Vault inside Pinnacle Bank Arena, where even Nebraska, who has not maybe performed as well as they are early here in 2025-26 under Fred Hoiberg, they've been very difficult to beat at home in Pinnacle Bank Arena in Big Ten play. I probably lean with Nebraska getting off to a perfect 10-0 start. I don't think it's a blowout by any means. I think it's a really competitive early season Big Ten game against the Badgers, who I still think very highly of the remainder of this conference slate, but I would probably give Nebraska the edge, at least early.
Yes, I am right there with you. And how big of a surprise do you feel Nebraska has been? Because I thought coming into the year that they were going to be a rock-solid team and things like that. And I think that a little bit of what we saw over the weekend, as well as Creighton just being a big fat disappointment this year as well. But the way that they absolutely dominated the Blue Jays, and what we both know is a big interstate rivalry between those two is big. And for Nebraska, I recognize that maybe they're not playing like the monsters of the Midway or the world's toughest schedule, but they've overcome all their challenges, and they've looked, in my opinion, very impressive to start the season.
They've been very efficient on both sides of the basketball. I think they're taking more threes really than we have ever seen. There's a lot of great ball movement among this Nebraska side. For the last few years, even with the guy, Ice Chilliams, as he was called in Big Ten play, but Bryce Williams last year and what he was doing in terms of kind of being that anchor offensively, that if he was cold, Nebraska went cold. It's a very diverse and I think a more fluid system this year for the Huskers offensively that I do think their ceiling is a lot higher. Now, we'll learn a lot more about this Nebraska team come late January and early February, Greg, to your point about how you perform early in conference play or in non-con and getting a better sense. Because when you're playing in an 18-team league that is the Big Ten, if you start to trail off in the bottom half of the conference, there is no guarantee that you earn an NCAA tournament berth, as we saw for Nebraska toward the tail end of last year. But, Greg, I really do believe in what Fred Hoiberg has built in Lincoln, and I do believe this year, this will be the team, finally, for Nebraska to win an NCAA tournament game. I do think they get a berth to the big dance, and I think they will take advantage because of how fluid the offense looks and how many pieces offensively for the Huskers can get it done.
Yep, Rick Bass coming back is so big. Losing him for the year last year, that was very rough for them. You bring back Berkey Butisel, so they're rock solid down low and one of the better defensive teams that we've got in all of college basketball right now, in my opinion. And then the other Big Ten game that we're going to be seeing on Wednesday is going to be Minnesota versus Purdue. And if Purdue loses this one, then I think they could have a little bit of cause for concern, considering they're 18.5 to 19.5 point favorites. But how do you take a look at this matchup with a Minnesota team that I feel like Nico Medved is doing a nice job of being able to put a stamp on the program? It's obviously going to take a little bit of time. There was a big giant rebuild that had to be done here, but we've got two low tempo teams, and I think that could make things very interesting with that 142.5 total.
Yeah, very, very slow tempo expected inside Mackey on Wednesday night against the Golden Gophers. And I do think, Greg, that when you look at this Purdue team, of course, I expect a big bounce back from the disappointing 23-point loss to Iowa State on Saturday. For this Purdue team, it's been a little bit shaky at times, right? First few games of the year without TKR, without Trey Kaufman-Wren. Okay, offense needed to kind of pick things up. They do that against Alabama. They do that in the games, of course, in Baja Mar against Memphis, and certainly against Texas Tech and that 30-point victory. The Red Raiders, though, early this year, a little bit shakier than I think we expected for two of the top teams with all the returning talent, and why so many people were high on both those teams entering this season. Again, Braden Smith is going to be the engine and the orchestrator, playing maybe a little bit cleaner basketball, being able to distribute, and I think we want to see a little bit more from some of those other pieces. Fletcher Loyer has had his games this year. Trey Kaufman-Wren is always going to be there, but a guy like Oscar Clough, can he kind of pick things up offensively? What are we going to see from C.J. Cox and Jakari Harris in terms of extending the floor for Purdue? They should have ample opportunities against Minnesota to be efficient, even if the pace is slower, at least to be efficient. I wonder, Greg, to get to that total, you said around 142.5 right now with these slower tempos, how do things look for Purdue offensively against this Gopher side, who, of course, pulled off a little bit of a stunner at home against Indiana just last week to start Big Ten play, the first time the Golden Gophers have won a Big Ten opener in quite some time. So for Minnesota, finding their footing under Nico Medved, who I believe is a fantastic basketball coach. Can they confuse things for Purdue, or will we see some more offensive rhythm that was lacking for the Boilers against the Cyclones on Saturday?
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that Minnesota is certainly heading in the right direction. That three-point shooting defense could be a little bit of a concern, and that's where the total is probably going to have a little bit of intrigue because, as we know, Purdue, they didn't have the greatest shooting performance against Iowa State, but this is still one of the best backcourts that we're finding in all of college basketball, and I think that that's going to be big for them, as Ben Stevens, who does such great work over here at VSIN, he's joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And just taking a look nationally, we've talked a little bit about the Big Ten, and it could be a Big Ten team or two, it could be someone from a different conference, but just who are a few teams that over the first month and a week of the season have really caught your eye and have been pleasant surprises in your eyes?
Yeah, I think Iowa State is certainly that, Greg, for what they have done and how they went into Mackey to dominate that game with all the talent they have returning. Guys like Tamin Lipsey, who hasn't been fully healthy this year, Milan Momcilovic, who has been incredible as well. And you look at where their metrics are early, top 5 in terms of offensive efficiency rating on KenPom, and the second most efficient defense in all of college basketball. And when you look at what TJ Otzelberger does, playing the Dragons at the top of this level, this Iowa State team is for real and continues to be. I think elsewhere, Duke has, of course, been incredibly fluid. What Cam Boozer has done, picking up immediately for the Blue Devils, has been awesome. Arizona, with a gauntlet of a non-conference slate, continuing to prove it. I think Tommy Lloyd is one of the best in the business with all the talent they have there. Jaden Bradley back. This Arizona team is legit. But I think one of the more surprising teams, and not through me, Greg, but through the very smart college hoops people that I follow on social media, started to highlight a team out of the SEC. Not the Alabamas, not the Kentuckys, not the Arkansas entering this year, but Vandy. And what Mark Byington is expected to do now in year number 2 in Nashville. What Vanderbilt has been able to do. How great they have looked on the offensive side of the ball. That's Mark Byington's staple, right? Try to turn people over, try to cause chaos, and then take advantage of it. I've been supremely impressed by Vanderbilt. One of 3 teams in the country alongside Duke and Michigan State already with 4 quad 1 wins this season. And they also have 3 victories against KenPom teams ranked in the top 50 as well. Vandy's got a really solid resume, and the performances against a pretty stout resume early in the year and a pretty solid schedule I've been very, very impressed by. We mentioned it's maybe not the SEC of last year that sent so many teams to the NCAA tournament. Still a good league, still will have a lot of quality throughout the conference slate. So I think Vanderbilt really is at the top of the charts right now. And if you can place a wager on the doors to win the conference, I think you're probably getting some pretty good value at this moment.
Oh, I'm right there with you. And in the SEC, it felt like there was a real top 2 or 3 teams in that conference last year. And I don't know if you agree with this or not, but just taking a look at the SEC, it just feels like the margins are very thin. And if you're looking at perhaps tightest power conferences, I think that this might be a great candidate for it, because right now you just talked about Vanderbilt and how good they have been. You've got Alabama, Arkansas, Florida. I mean, you've got a lot of good teams, not necessarily that one surefire Final Four team. Heck, throw in there Tennessee, Auburn, and it just feels like you've got a lot of teams that when it's all said and done are going to be hovering right around, we'll say 10 to 30, but not necessarily that upper echelon team.
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. And right now I'm looking at the prices, at least on the FanDuel Sportsbook, and Vandy already has the second best price to win the SEC. Maybe we have missed the boat, but at plus 420, only 80 cents behind the Crimson Tide. Of course, they're not into conference play just yet, and that will dictate it regardless of what the overall record or the strong start in non-con play has to say. But a lot of those teams that really anchored the SEC, both at the top of the conference, the best of the best, and of course leading to the depth throughout the conference, have lost a step, I think we can say, from last year. Alabama and Nate Oates going to continue to do things. Lamar and Philon, incredible. We know what their pace is always going to be. We know what their style is always going to be, shooting as many three-pointers as humanly possible. Florida, of course, is missing, I think, their veteran guard play from last year, but I expect Todd Golden to develop that throughout this season. The Vols have already taken a couple of losses that I think have been unexpected, including against my Syracuse Orange in the Dome. Huge victory for SU to kind of get their footing in the third year, of the Red Autry era, but still a different loss and a different Tennessee outlook than we expected. I expected big things out of Kentucky in year 2 under Mark Pope. It's been quite the opposite. Stephen Pearl still needs to find his footing as the head coach for Auburn. So in all of these teams that we have kind of talked about, Greg, that were the anchors and the staples and the brilliance of the SEC a year ago, I think everybody has kind of taken at least a step, if not multiple steps back from last year's prognosis. I think Vanderbilt then presents some talent and some value in their prices for what they can do in conference play. I've been impressed by Mike White in Georgia as well, a little bit deeper down the board, an 18-1 price on the Dogs. They've looked really good this year and have a pretty good resume to start. So I think there might be a couple of teams at the top of the SEC in basketball that maybe we do not expect often. And I really do think Vandy will be in that title race in that conference for the entirety of the conference slate.
Yep, I'm right there with you. Actually, my first job out of college was doing weekends at the official flagship station of the Vanderbilt Commodores, so I know very well about that program, and It's been a while for them, and it feels like they finally have things rocking and rolling. Then just in terms of the board that we do have for Wednesday, anything else that's really jumping out to you? Because we did highlight the 2 Big Ten conference games that we're going to be having, not necessarily a ton of ranked teams, but as I always like to say, money is money. It doesn't matter if you're betting on the Super Bowl or if you're betting on some random swag game in January, you're able to make money on it. Anything that might be standing out to you?
Yeah, an interesting game, I think, for the Will Wade era, kind of picking things up for NC State as they get ready to take on Liberty in Raleigh. When you look at some of the KenPom projections, when you look at the Wolfpack this year, game will probably close, I think, around an 8.5, 9.5 point spread. A really good Liberty team, of course, in how they play basketball year in, year out. But I'm really excited to see what NC State can be under Will Wade because of how strong they have been, as strong as he is as a coach. Richie McKay and his Flames like to slow things down a little bit. Really good in terms of getting the shot that they desire and converting. When you look at the effective field goal percentage right now for Liberty, it's damn near 63%, third most efficient in terms of effective field goal percentage in all of college basketball, of our 365 D1 programs now playing at this level. So I think it's a really good early non-con test for NC State, not against the high major program, but against maybe one of the best mid-major programs, certainly the favorites in Conference USA this year. Really good litmus test, I would say. I really want to see what NC State does at home in Raleigh in this environment against Liberty here early in December.
And 2 really good three-point shooting teams as well. I think both might be doing for a little bit of regression, so that could give us a bit of value on that under, which right now I'm finding that total at a 155.5, and Liberty's a bottom 10 team in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And you're talking about the KenPom number being single digits, right now seeing 11.5. I personally am going to be taking the points on Liberty there, so yeah. I'm right there with you. I think that is going to be a fun game for Wednesday. And Ben, I know you're doing tremendous work here at the network. You do a whole bunch of shows, and you do so also well, taking a look at college football, college basketball, and quite a bit else. So let the good people at home know what's all on tap for you, and hope people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, live bet Saturday, each and every Saturday, noon to 3 p.m. Eastern time. Even as college football winds down, we'll still be having some bowl game opportunities. We'll set the stage for Army-Navy this week, of course, and all throughout the college football playoff run will be a great time. And you can follow me at Ben Scott Stevens on Twitter, on X, whatever you call it. Hopefully we'll have some good content out there. And Greg, as always, man, I appreciate you having me on the show.
Absolutely. The one thing with it, though, you're going to have to bet Notre Dame in basketball and not football. Unfortunately, we are not going to be able to get that opportunity, but you know what? You get the opportunity every Saturday to hear Ben on the network. He does such a great job, and every single time he joins me, he lends such great insight. So big thanks to Ben for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSIN Family Podcast. And up next, I give you guys picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Wednesday as we have some bank shots. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSIN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Ben Stevens. He does such a tremendous job here at the network. He does a great job being able to gauge all things college sports. He, much like myself, has a lot of Big Ten running through his veins, and he does a great job with our weekend live betting shows here at VSIN as well. So big thanks to Ben for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Wednesday as we hit some bank shots.
Most financial establishments close at a certain time, but not here. It is time for a side and total on every game on today's betting board bank shots.
Do note that as per usual, any changes that are made to these plays will be listed up on my Twitter/X feed at gunit_81, and we are going to be going in Las Vegas rotation order. This is where we go with the games that involve two bigger conference teams first, and then games that involve any one team from these conferences are going to be listed at the bottom. That'd be the MEAC, the SWAC, the America East. You've got the Big South in there. The Atlantic Sun is a part of that. We've got the Northeast Conference, the Patriot League, and also the Southland. So, but if we do get things started here with 635, 636 on the card, Merrimack is on the road against Princeton. Princeton, a 2.5 to 3-point favorite. 133.5 to 134.5 is the total, and set a total of a 133.5. I do like the under. You've got a Merrimack team that is looking to play quite slow. They're back outside the top 280 in terms of total possessions per game. Princeton has actually sped themselves up from a year ago, and it really hasn't done a lot of good. 259th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, but they have really been slowing things down ever since Dalen Davis went out with an injury, and that's a big reason why I am in here on Merrimack. I set them as a 1.5 point dog, so don't necessarily want the money line, but I'm going to be willing to take those points, as right now for Princeton, it's been Jackson Hickey and Jack Sandin who have been your main men. They both give you about 4.5 rebounds per game. They're combining for 25 points per game, and with Jackson Hickey has been able to shoot about 40% from three, but Princeton, well outside the top 225 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. They just don't do a great job of giving themselves second and third chances outside the top 275 in terms of offensive rebound percentage. Now, they've been a top 75 team in terms of defensive rebound percentage, but with how slowly they play, 13 turnovers per game is not so great. And for Merrimack, this team is actually on pace to have their worst turnover ratio ever. This team, since they have joined the D1 ranks, has always been in the top 40 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. They're just outside that right now, but over their last 4 games, they've been generating 15 plus turnovers per game. The big key is getting Todd Brogna going. He comes over from Stonehill, 6 points, 4.5 boards. He was last year a double-figure scorer, so you need a bit more out of him. But Keviar Kennedy, along with Ernest Shelton, have both given you 14.8 points per game apiece. They're combining to shoot about 37% from three-point range. Between the two of them, you're getting a little bit over 3 steals per game. Merrimack has done a good job taking care of the ball. They've been a top 100 team in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis, but the team always struggles with their three-point shooting, back outside the top 275 with that regard, and Merrimack currently a bottom 30 team in all of college basketball in terms of rebound percentage, so they do leave themselves a little bit vulnerable. But with Princeton being so sloppy, with dealing with the Dalen Davis injury, I do think they get a lower scoring game, and on the underside, I told 133.5, and at 2+, I'm going to be willing to take those points with Merrimack. 637, 638 on the card. New Mexico is on the road against VCU. VCU is a 9 to a 9.5 point favorite, and your total, it is 152.5 to 153.5, and did set a total of a 149. I do like the under. You got a pair of teams that have been solid in terms of generating turnovers. For VCU, about 82nd in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. New Mexico, they bring in Eric Olin, who did such a great job over at UC San Diego, and he's implementing that style, 28th in terms of turnovers per possession. New Mexico is fast, but not warp speed, 137th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Now, near number one, Phil Martelli Jr., VCU has been playing quite a bit more quickly, 68th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, but do have a VCU team that isn't necessarily doing the little things amazing. They're about 145th in the country in terms of their two-point shooting percentage. They're about 77th in terms of points per possession, but they do turn the ball over a little bit more than what you'd like outside the top 180 in terms of ball security. As for VCU, it's a little bit more of a whole square than the sum of its parts approach, as right now you've got yourself 5 different guys that give between 9.4 and 13.1 points per game. Terrence Hill has actually been the main scorer with 13 points, shooting over 50% per three. I think we'll see a little bit of regression there, but Lazar Djokovic, who stands about 6'10", he's been able to shoot in the mid-30s from three, 11 points, 5 rebounds per game. For VCU, they've done a really good job of rebounding by committee, as Djokovic is the lone guy that gives you over 5 rebounds per game, but they're doing a nice job giving themselves some second and third chances. They've been a top 125 team in terms of rebound percentage, and on the New Mexico side of things, you do have only a few players that really followed Eric Olin from UC San Diego, but one of those guys is Chris Outlet. It doesn't look like much with him, give you 5.5 points per game, but he really does a nice job of helping this team generate turnovers, 2 steals, 4 assists per game, so he's sort of the head of the snake when it comes to being able to generate those turnovers. Well, Jake Hall has come up from the non-D1 ranks, 13.5 points, shooting 40% from 3. He's been the main guy there, and now they are getting to Javius Miller back as well. He's been missing for a few games this season. He's been able to give you 7 points per contest, coming over after being a nice 3-point shooter over at North Dakota State. Good chance he might miss this game, though, as he was out for that game that we saw a few nights ago against Santa Clara. That said, you've got Dayton Albury, who's been able to give you 12.5 points, shooting only about 32% from 3, but he's been able to generate a steal and a half per contest as well. This is a New Mexico team that is outside the top 225 in terms of offensive rebound percentage, but they've been a top 150 team in terms of not allowing second and third chances, and they're allowing teams to shoot less than 30.5% from three-point range. They've been a top 100 team in terms of guarding the arc, so I do think that you get a little bit more of a controlled game, and I do think that the New Mexico defense keeps them lively. I set my number at 7. I'm going to be willing to take those points with New Mexico, and I'm in on the under 639, 640 on the card. So Florida plays those to Charleston. Charleston 14.5 to 15.5 point underdogs, 154.5 to 155.5 is the total, and it sets out Florida as a 12.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Charleston. Now, this did open up at a 12.5, so I actually agreed with the opener, but now we're just getting a little bit too far out, and Charleston has been dealing with injuries all season long. That's why they've got some warped numbers. That's why they're playing so much more slowly than they did a season ago. Currently 272nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Dealing with the injury to Mr. Dean, first name Mr., last name Dean, who was giving you about 10.5 points per game, has been an issue, but now you've gotten Connor Hickman back on the floor. He missed the first 5 games of the season. He's been able to do a nice job being the team's main scorer with 15 points per game. I have to think that the 3-point shooting is going to progress for Charleston. They're right now shooting as a collective 26.1% from 3. I understand that they might be down a little bit from a season ago, but Jalen Counter is a guy that shoots better than 26% from 3. Hickman, throughout his career, he's much better than a 31% 3-point shooter. As a matter of fact, career about 36% 3-point shooter, and I do think that they experience a positivity against a South Florida team that is allowing teams to shoot 36.1% from 3-point range. That's outside the top 250 nationally. Now, for South Florida, they have been a top 60 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis at home, and they are playing at warp speed. This team is in the top 10 nationally in terms of total possessions per game. With the South Florida team, you've right now got 5 different guys give you at least 12 points per game. Wes Enos has been able to give you 12 points per contest. Isaiah Nelson, one of the main guys that follow Brian Hodgson on over from Arkansas State, 12.5 points, 9 boards, nearly 2 blocks per contest. Joseph Pignon, 2 steals, 14 points per game. Joshua Majafo, 14.5 points, shooting 36% from 3. And then CJ Brown, he's been able to give you 5 assists, 4 boards, 14 points per game. Not going to light you up from 3. At South Florida, they're only shooting about 31% from the outside. I expect that to rise a little bit, as well as South Florida has been very much based around generating turnovers. A top 40 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, but one thing that Charleston has actually done a really good job of is taking care of the ball. Only 9 turnovers per game. That's a top 50 mark in all of college basketball. I do think that they keep it clean. I think that Charleston, with getting back Connor Hickman and a few others, they're going to be able to speed themselves up. And I do think that with having someone like a Troy Machat down low, being able to give you about 2 blocks, 7 points per game, and also being able to have some nice rough and in trouble with Christian Reeves coming on over from Clemson, 7.5 points, a block, 6 rebounds per game. That this team does a relatively solid job inside. I think both of these teams heat up from 3, and you get an up and down game. Semi-line at 12.5, won't take the points with Charleston, and I'm going to be in on the over. Semi-total 166.5, 641, 642 on the card. Minnesota is on the road against Purdue, and the state with the smallest strengths in the union. Minnesota is an 18.5 point underdog. It's a game between 140.5 to 142.5. Nothing mini about the size of an underdog that they are in. I'm willing to lay it with Purdue. I set them as a 19.5 point favorite. I really don't want to be going past like 18.5/19, but this feels like a bounce back spot after they just could not get their offense going against Iowa State. Iowa State, one of the best teams in all of college basketball in terms of generating turnovers, and it's a Minnesota team that has much improved from a season ago, but we do know that with Minnesota, this goes back to the old regime. They always had very demonstrative home and road splits. This is a Minnesota group that has had a little bit of a tough go of it on defense in year number 1 under Nico Medved as well. Minnesota outside the top 100 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and as a matter of fact, they are giving up over 25 points more per 100 possessions away from home rather than at home. You've got a lot of teams with extreme splits right now, but I think that they're going to have a very tough time matching up with Fletcher Lawyer along with Braden Smith. These two guys have been combined for 27.5 points per game. Smith is shooting 41.5% from 3, 8.8 assists to 2.7 turnovers per game, and then Lawyer shooting 46.5% from the outside, and just the overall size I think might swallow up Minnesota as well. As you do have on the Minnesota side, Jalen Crocker-Johnson give you over 10 rebounds per game. He's been solid, but now you've got Trey Kaufman, Wren, and Oscar Clough. Clough, 11 points, 9 boards per contest. Wren, 14 points, 7.5 rebounds per game. It is a Purdue team that has been outside the top 125 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but it's also a Purdue team that has been a top 20 team in terms of rebound percentage. Now, the one thing that Purdue is not going to do is going to force a lot of turnovers. They're well outside the top 300 with that regard. That's part of the reason why the defense has not necessarily been as prolific as you'd think. And this is a Minnesota team that where you beat them is from 3-point range. Right now, they're allowing teams to shoot over 37% from distance, as outside the top 300 of college basketball. Minnesota's starting to see some progression with their 3-point shooting after it was below 30% for much of the season. K. Tyson, big reason why, 21.5 points, 4.5 boards, shooting 37.5% from 3. He was really good at Belmont as a 6'7" wing a few seasons ago, and then Langston Reynolds has come in. He's been able to give the team 10.5 points, 3 assists per game, while Isaac Usama has been that main facilitator, 4 assists, 10 points per game. Minnesota about 12 turnovers per game. Neither here nor there on that. And for Minnesota, they're a top 75 team in terms of defensive rebound percentage, but I do think that Purdue is going to be able to exploit that 3-point shooting defense to be able to get the job done here. I did set a total of a 141.5. I think that's going to be a relatively efficient game, but neither of these teams are necessarily pushing a ton of tempo with Minnesota in terms of total possessions per game. They're clocking in about 324th in all of college basketball. Purdue just a hair above that at 305th. So right now we're seeing this total at right around about a 140.5, 141.5. Between a 140.5 and a 142.5, since I made my number a 141.5, I personally would rather have a 140.5 over rather than a 142.5 under. So I am looking at that 140.5 to the over, and I'm looking to lay it here with Purdue. 643, 644 on the card. Idaho is on the road against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame is an 11.5 point favorite total on this game between 143.5 to 144.5. I said Notre Dame is 16.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. I recognize that Notre Dame is not necessarily the Mona Lisa Vitos of defense, but this Idaho team is once again relatively rough in terms of their defense, 236th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, which is actually some marked improvement for them. Idaho never generates a whole lot of turnovers, and right now for this Idaho team, they're outside the top 300 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, but they've been a little bit better on the inside. They're a top 55 team in terms of defensive rebound percentage. Teams are only grabbing 8 offensive rebounds per game against them, and it is an Idaho team that, to their credit, they've been a top 125 offense in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, despite one of their main guys returning from the season ago. Christian Gonzalez has only played 1 game this season. You've got Jackson Rasmussen as a bit of a wing, giving you about 15 points, 4 boards per contest, and I mean, a lot of this rebounding is by committee. You've got a trio of guys, Jack Payne, Brody Woodbury, and Seth Joba, that are all give you between 5 and 5.6 rebounds per game. And then you've had Isaiah Brickner do a really good job of giving this team something from the outside. 10.5 points, shooting 63% from 3. I don't think that that's going to be long-lasting, but Idaho as a whole, they do shoot 37% from the outside. And it's a Notre Dame group that has been much better down low than they have been in the past. Adding Carson Tout, who was a really good rebounder over at Northern Arizona last season, is a big reason why. Only about 5.9 points per game, but good passer is big man, multiple assists per game, 10.1 rebounds rebounds per contest for Notre Dame. They shoot about 36% from three-point range, with Marcus Burton, their main scorer, not even being an amazing three-point shooter. He's only shooting about 30.5% from the outside, but 18.5 points, 3.5 assists. He's making things happen for guys like a Brandon Shrewsbury. He's been able to shoot 43% from three-point. Jalen Harrelson has also been a nice add as well. 2.5 assists, 13 points per contest. It's a Notre Dame team that is pretty efficient on the offensive side of things. They do leave something to be desired defensively, but they've also been a top 80 unit in terms of defensive rebound percentage as well. So this should be a rather controlled game, as either of these teams are going to be looking to push a lot of tempo for Notre Dame in terms of total possessions per game. Right now they're checking in about 272nd in all of college basketball. Meanwhile, for this Idaho squad, they're more around about 239th, but do think that you get some good efficiency here. I'm going to be willing to lay with Notre Dame. I set them as a 16.5 point favorite, and with regards to the total, did set mine at a 142.5 with the lack of second chances. So in on the under and in on Notre Dame. 645, 646 on the card. NC State is playing us at Liberty, and Liberty is a 11.5 point underdog. 155.5 to 157 is the total, and did set a total here of a 153.5. I'm going to be willing to take the under in this spot with this Liberty team. They're just not a fast team. Like, they've been really efficient. They've been a top 40 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. They're shooting over 40% from three as a collective, but for Liberty, 349th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. NC State is fast, but they're not warp speed fast. They're about 139th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and when it comes to NC State, you've been able to get some relatively good production out of Darion Williams. He's come over and he's been the main man with 16.5 points, 5 boards, 3.5 assists, right now shooting 47.5% from three. And NC State, they themselves shooting 39.8% from three. We should see some regression, especially Trey Hallman shooting 54% from three. Kadir Copeland shooting 56% from three-point range. These guys are good. They're not necessarily that good, though, and you're not going to have a lot of second and third chances in this game. NC State is outside the top 275 in terms of their offensive rebound percentage. Liberty is well outside the top 300, so it's going to be a make it and take it sort of game. Now, NC State has become a top 100 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, and NC State is allowing teams to shoot about 35% from three. That's a little bit of an issue, but you have had Ben Allen Lubin do a nice job getting the team 7.5 boards, 13 points per game. He gives the team 3 of their 9.9 offensive rebounds per game, by the way, so he's been able to do a great job on that front. And then when it comes to Liberty, I really think the key for this team is a guy that really doesn't even shoot it from three. That'd be Zach Cleveland. He's saying 6'7". He gives you 10.5 points, 9 boards, 8.4 assists per game as a sort of point forward. So I love what he brings to the table. Right now, Brett Decker Jr., he's starting to regress. He's shooting 58.5% for three at 8 threes per game. Again, that'll be going downward. 19.5 points per game. Liberty as a whole shooting 43% from three-point range. Liberty is doing a great job of not allowing teams to get to the free throw line. Top 50 team in terms of fewest free throws allowed per possession. They themselves, though, outside the top 340 in terms of free throw attempts per game. And for Liberty, doing a great job taking care of the ball. They've been a top 20 team in terms of their ball security, but it's a style where they're not going to grab any offensive rebounds. They're not going to let you grab offensive rebounds either, but I love what J.J. Harper brings to the table, shooting over 50% from three, 11.5 points per game. Kaden Matheny has been in the system for a few years, 14 points, 3 boards, 3 assists, and I do think that in this game, Liberty is going to do a nice job holding in there. NC State not doing the best job of being able to guard the three-point arc against a Liberty team that does a great job taking care of the ball. I think that you get a nice controlled game where Liberty is able to give a good test. So I set my line at 9.5. I'm willing to take the points with Liberty, and I'm going to be in on the under. 647, 648 on the card. George Washington, our nation's first president, plays us at Delaware. Delaware, a 21 to a 21.5 point underdog. 156.5 to a 157.5 is the total. I set my line at 18.5. I'm willing to take a shot here on Delaware. Now, it's less than savory right now for Delaware, and this is a Delaware offense that has been able to shoot it relatively okay from three, but the defense has really been giving it up. Delaware 265th in all of college basketball in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. George Washington leaking a little bit of oil as well. They're about 125th of the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but with George Washington, they should be able to absolutely manhandle on the glass. Right now, George Washington is a top 75 team in terms of rebound percentage, with Rafael Castro leading the way, a block, 16 points, 7.5 rebounds per game. Garrett Johnson has been relatively rock solid in terms of a bit of everything, 15 points, 5 boards. He's shooting 37% from three-point range. Meanwhile, Trey Dinkins, who comes on over from Duquesne, he's been able to shoot over 40% from three. He gives you 10.5 points per game. Now, for George Washington, they do need to clean up the turnovers outside the top 175 in terms of ball security, and for George Washington, we've seen them crank up their tempo a little bit more this year. Not that they're the most fast team in the world, but still, about 66th in the country terms of total possessions per game. Meanwhile, it's a Delaware team that they have been dialing it back, 264th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, but I did set a total here of a 158.5. I'm going to be in on the over because you've got a Delaware team that they actually do an okay job of being able to bomb it from three against D1 competition. They're shooting over 36% from three with Mako and Emery and Christian Bliss. Both give you 14.5 points per game between the two of them. They're shooting combined about 36.5% from three. And then Justin Fernandez, when he's been out there on the court, is giving you 14.5 points on 40% three-point shooting. He was missing for a few games. They have now gotten him back, and he scored 12 plus points in 4 of the 5 games that he's played in. So he's been able to give this team a little bit of a boost, and that is part of the reason why I'm going to take a shot here on the points. They're probably going to be without Jameel Brown once again, but Tyler Hauser, 12.5 points, 6.5 rebounds per game. He's been solid. Now what Delaware does not do is grab offensive rebounds. They are outside the top 340 in terms of percentage of their missed shots. That results in an offensive rebound, and they're going to allow you to be able to keep things clean. As Delaware is outside the top 320 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis on defense, but I do think that the three-point shooting is just enough to keep them lively in this game. So I did set a line of 18.5. I'm willing to take over 20 points here with Delaware. I like the over, so I total 158.5, 649, 650 on the card. Marshall plays us Western Kentucky, and Western Kentucky is a underdog of 1.5 points. 161.5 to 162.5 is the total, and set a total of a 162 between 161.5 and 162.5. Personally, I would rather take the 162.5 under, mainly because you have had quite a few turnover issues with Marshall, and this is recognizing that Western Kentucky is one of the most warp speed teams that you're going to find in all of college basketball. As for this Western Kentucky team, in terms of total possessions per game, they are once again checking in the top 15. They are number 11 in all of college basketball, but for Marshall, they are well outside the top 300 in terms of ball security with over 15 turnovers per game. Marshall's playing fast as well, 67th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and they do a nice job grinding down low with Matthew Van Coleman coming in, giving you about 2.5 blocks per contest as a 7'4" big man from Elon, 10.5 points. He's shooting 73% from the floor. Wyatt Franks, along with Jalen Spear, have done a nice job in the backcourt. Franks is more of your three-point shooter, 39% from the outside, a steal, a block, 2.5 assists, 15 points per game, and then Spear, 6 assists per game, 13 points per contest, but he and Noah Asudi, hopefully I got that correct, and Asudi has been able to give you 4 assists and 13 points per game. They combine between the two of them over 5.5 turnovers per game. That's a little bit less than tremendous, and this is a Marshall team that is in the top 40 in all of college basketball in terms of free throws allowed on a per possession basis on defense, so they are going to be very willing to put Western Kentucky on the free throw line. And for Western Kentucky, this team under Hank Paloma, they really do play at warp speed, but they're not necessarily a team that goes bombs away from three. They're a top 50 team in terms of the percentage of their field goal attempts that come from inside the arc. They have been a top 125 team in terms of offensive rebound percentage, with Tegan Moore giving you more, 19.5 6 boards, steal and a half per contest. For Western Kentucky, they've had a relatively good time in terms of generating turnovers, top 85 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. They've been a top 10 team in terms of free throw attempts per game, and they are also allowing teams to get to the free throw line. Top 50 team in terms of allowing free throw attempts on a per possession basis as well. So they draw a lot of fouls, they give a lot of fouls. You've got Ryan Myers coming off the bench. He comes over from Western Illinois, give you 9 points, shooting 43% from three. But outside that, you just don't have a lot of 3-point shooting. This team is looking to have some rough and tumble with someone like Brian Salbungwe, who a few years ago had 9 rebounds per game over at Tulsa, 8 points, 7.5 rebounds per game. I do think that is going to do a nice job in this spot, but I do think that Van Coleman is going to be able to do just enough for this Marshall team to be able to get it done. Recognize that Marshall is having a tough time with their ball security, but with Western Kentucky outside the top 340 in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage, I do think that Marshall just barely finds a way to be able to get the job done at home and finds a way to the free throw line. So my line at a 162 with this total, 162.5 for higher in on the under, and with Marshall, wanted to lay up to a 1.5 with them, made them a 2-point favorite. 651, 652 on the card. Neutral court game between UMass and Boston College. Boston College, 2 to 2.5 point favorites, 139.5 to 140.5 is the total, and I set Boston College as a 1.5 point favorite. So we can get to a 2+. I'm going to be willing to think those points. You've got a pretty nice simple war that's going to be going on here, as UMass is a team that's looking to crank up the tempo, 57th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Boston College is not looking to crank up the tempo. They are 253rd in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and for Boston College, it's been all about Donald Hand. He's supplying the team with 15 points, 5.5 boards, and Fred Payne has been a nice ancillary piece as well with about 13 points per game. The Payne train has been able to shoot 35.5% from three, and for Boston College, the 3-point shooting is getting better, but right now they're outside the top 300 in terms of the 3-point shooting percentage at 29.2%. Now they allow opponents to shoot less than 30% from three as well. Should see some negativity with that 3-point shooting defense, positivity with their own 3-point shooting, and for Boston College, they just don't generate any stinking in turnovers whatsoever. So UMass is going to have a bunch of nice, clean possessions. Boston College outside of the top 320 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. Meanwhile, you got a UMass team that's in the top 100 with that regard, and UMass should be able to dominate the glass. Top 25 team with regards to their defensive rebound percentage, headlined by Leonardo Batil, who comes over from Albany Christian. Now, he does turn the ball for 3.3 times per game, but 2.8 assists, 8 boards, 16.5 points per game, shooting 50% from 3, though he's went 1 of 2 from 3-point range, so there's that aspect of things. But you've been able to have Daniel Hinkin-Sanford be able to give you 6 boards, 7 points per game. Jaden Junji has been able to give you about 7 boards, 7 points per game. So you've got all sorts of size with this team, and for this UMass team, their 3-point shooting is still not great, but bringing in Marcus Banks has been big. He's supplying 17 points, shooting 37.5% from 3 after he was a nice 40+% 3-point shooter last year over at UMBC. After last year, UMass was outside the top 350 with regards to their 3-point shooting percentage. I do think that that's going to be just enough for them to be able to stay lively. I recognize that Bowden Kopke has been able to do a nice job for this Boston College team of being able to supply the team with in that neighborhood of about 5.5 rebounds per game, but I do think that Boston College does find a way to just barely be able to eke this one out because of the UMass shooting, but with UMass doing as good of a job on the glass as they are, I do think that this UMass team holds in there. I think you get a 1-possession game, so semi line at 1.5. I'm willing to take 2+ here with UMass, and I like the over. Semi total at a 143.5. 653, 654 on the card. UT Martin is on the road against Southern Illinois. Southern Illinois is a favorite here of 9.5 to 10.5 points. Seeing 11 out there as well. 149.5 to 150 is the total. I saw my line at 5.5. I'm going to be willing to take the points here with UT Martin. Now, for UT Martin, what has really been killing this team has been ball security. They're outside the top 350 in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis, but you've got a Southern Illinois team that has really left something to be desired with their 3-point shooting. They shoot less than 30% from 3-pointers. Scott Nagy style is always playing really good offense and not so great on defense, and for Southern Illinois, right now they're checking in about 170th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. This UT Martin team has been a pretty rock solid defense. They are ranking right now in the top 100 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and for this UT Martin team, it's just so interesting. You've got the international men of mystery who have got a little bit of something going on. As they've got guys from, I think, like 13 different countries on their roster. It's actually one of the most ridiculous things I've ever found. But that said, for UT Martin, it seems like everyone is between like 6'5", 6'8". They're able to pop it from 3-point range. Andrzej Bramovich has been your main guy with about 15.5 points, 9.5 boards. He shoots 44.5% from 3-point range. Gragos Lagu has been able to supply the team with about 3 assists, 14 points per game, the 3.5 turnovers per game he needs to work on, but this is also a bunch that has been able to do a really good job of being able to guard the 3-point line as well. Teams against UT Martin are shooting less than 31% from 3-point range, and when it comes to Southern Illinois, this has been a unit that has been, just in my opinion, a little bit disjointed with regards to their perimeter play. This has actually been a very good team with regards to their low post play, as you've got LGB squared, who've done a nice job being able to reel in there a combined about 11 rebounds per game, as you've got Prince LGB, who's been able to give you 8.5 points, 5.5 rebounds per game. Rollins has been able to give you 8.5 points, 6 boards per contest, and for the Southern Illinois team, they have been a top 175 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, but lone double-figure scorers, Kilron House, who's been able to come in from Jacksonville State, 14.5 points, 2.5 assists. He only shoots about 30% from 3. Drew Staffy has been your main 3-point shooter at 36% from the outside, 3 assists, 10 points per game, and Isaiah Stafford, who missed all of last year after being a really, really nice go-to scorer over at Valparaiso. He's been a little bit slow going as well. He's only been able to supply the team with about 9 points per contest. I do think that in the end, you've got a Southern Illinois team that is going to be looking to crank up the tempo a little bit more. This team is playing much more quickly here in season number 2 of the Scott Nagy system. They're about 87th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. You've got a UT Martin team that is more middle of the road, 216th in the country with this regard, but I do think that you get enough scoring for the over. I think that there's a little bit of positivity to be had for Southern Illinois, but I do think that for Southern Illinois, they might have a little bit more of a difficult time in terms of generating turnovers on UT Martin. They've been a little bit more efficient with the ball, and they think you get some late game fouling. So I might total 151.5. I like the over and the points with UT Martin. 655, 656 on the card. It is Utah Valley, and they play Idaho State, and Idaho State does find themselves as a underdog of 10.5 to 11.5 points. 143.5 to 144 is the total. And I said Utah Valley is just a 5-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to take the points. Idaho State has been a really rock-solid team with regards to rebounding. Now, Idaho State has also been well outside the top 250 in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting, but that said, this is not a team in Utah's Valley that is necessarily going to light you up from 3-point range. For Idaho State in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, they're about 158th in all of college basketball, but if you look at them when they are away from home, they actually become a top 100 defense with this regard, and Utah Valley is always based around their defense, as they've been outside the top 275 in terms of their ball security. They're turning the ball over 14 plus times per game. For Utah Valley, very rock solid on defense, 54th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, actually giving up 3 points more per 100 possessions when they're at home rather than when they're away from home. So that's been really fascinating to say the least. But for Utah Valley, you do have Trevon Leonard, who's back, and I like what he's been able to bring to the table. Last year, he was more of an ancillary scorer. He's been able to give you double figures, but he's back to being able to supply the team with 4+ assists per contest. But I do think that they're going to have a little bit of a tough time just dealing with all the guys on Idaho State that do a nice job in terms of being able to pull in there some rebounds. You do want to be getting a little bit more out of Evan Otten, who's only been able to give you 4 points per game, but he gives you 5 boards. He gives you 2 blocks per contest, so he's been rock solid down there. Connor Hellenbeck, he's got versatility, 2 assists, 13 points, 4.5 boards. He's shooting 41.5% from 3. Martin Keel has been able to shoot about 38.5% from 3-point range, 12.5 points per game. He missed a few games earlier in the season. He's been able to play in the last few. He's giving you double figures in each of the last 4 that he's returned, and so he's been able to do a pretty rock solid job there. And for Idaho State, this is a team that's either here nor there with regards to taking care of the ball. They're turning the ball over about 11.5 times per game, and you are probably going to be getting a little bit more of a tempo shift here from Idaho State, as you've got Utah Valley 116th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Idaho State, typically they like to play more slow and controlled, and we are very much seeing that. 335th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And for this Utah Valley team, it is a case where they no longer have the main Welling brother from a season ago, but they do bring back Hayden Welling, and he's been able to do a pretty nice job down low, being able to supply this team with about 9 points, just under a block per contest. And then Isaac Hawkins, who doesn't give you a lot of scoring, he's been able to supply a little bit over a block per game as well. It's a Utah Valley team that has actually been able to shoot 37% from 3, with Tyler Hendricks right now shooting 57% from the outside, 12.5 points per game. Leonard, I mentioned before, he's been able to shoot 43% from the outside. I think that you're going to see a little bit of regression here. Fully recognize that this Idaho State team has been outside the top 175 in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage, but all in all, I do take a look at this spot, and I do think that for Idaho State, their rebounding, being a top 40 team in terms of rebound percentage last year, a little bit down from that this year, but still being rock solid with this regard, allows them to hold in there. I set my line at 5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Idaho State, and did set a total here of a 139, so anything of a 139.5 or higher right now, seeing for 143.5, 144, I'm in on the under. 657, 658 on the card. Kansas City, UMKC, they play host to Weber State. Weber State, a 4.5 to a 5.5 point favorite. 149.5 to a 150.5 is the total, and I set a total of a 142.5. I am in on the under. Now, Kansas City has really sped themselves up this year. Right now, Kansas City is 93rd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. First few games of the season, they were going super up-tempo. I think that they realize they're falling, and they've been playing at a rate of about 6 possessions per game fewer over their last 4 games. So we are seeing a quite big tempo shift here. Meanwhile, you've got a Weber State team that they've cranked it up to about 65th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Once again, I do think that they are starting to really slow things down as well, so it's going to be really interesting to see what they bring to the table. But that's it. With this UMKC team, I did have to set them as a 6.5 point underdog. I'm going to be willing to lay up to 6 with Weber State. It's a Weber State group that has been able to do a nice job in finding good 3-point shooting. They're shooting about 34.5% from 3. They're allowing teams to shoot 24.5% from 3, and I certainly do think that there's going to be a regression with that. They aren't going to continue to allow teams to shoot under 25% all season long, but you've got 6 different guys that are giving you at least 9.7 points per game for this group, as Nigel Burris, who was a really good 3-point shooter back in the day over at Idaho, he's been able to give you 9.5 points, 5.5 rebounds per game, and this is a relatively good rebounding team with Weber State as well. They've been a top 100 team in terms of offensive rebound percentage, top 100 team in terms of overall rebound percentage as well. A little bit vulnerable on the inside, outside the top 250 in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage, but Jace Whiting, who was over at UNLV and Boise St, 14.5 points, 3 assists. He's shooting 43% from 3. Vijami Vartinen has been able to give you about 11.5 points per contest. I like what Edwin Suarez Jr. has been able to supply with about 10 points, 7 rebounds per game. So these guys are all doing a nice job rocking and rolling there. And On the flip side for Kansas City, with them getting back to their roots, they're doing a little bit of a better job down low, but this has been uncharacteristically bad for them. They are currently outside the top 275 with regards to defensive rebound percentage. You've had Uriah Evans be the main headline scorer, about 3.5 assists, 13 points per game, with the turnovers really being the issue for Kansas City. Outside the top 3 in terms of ball security, they are also outside the top 3 in terms of their 3-point shooting percentage and 2-point shooting percentage, and outside the top 275 with regards to their free throw shooting percentage as well, so that's certainly not great. But that said, this is a squad that it feels like they're starting to get back to what they were a few seasons ago. They've got holdovers in Jason Petty along with Kasheem Grady, who have been able to combine for about 20.5 points per game, but neither of these guys are shooting above 30% from 3, and Evans is the only guy in the roster that's shooting 37.5% from 3. We should see some negative regression with Weber State and their 3-point shooting defense, and UMKC should be able to shoot better than 25.7% from 3-point range moving forward. I just don't know if that's in this game, though, and I do think that for this Weber State team, they're going to do a nice job dominating on the glass. I did set my line at 6.5, so I'm going to be willing to lay the number, and I just don't think that UMKC gets their offense going. I set my total more around a 142.5, so I'm going to be in on the under, and I'm going to be willing to lay the 4.5 to 5.5 here with Weber State, 659, 660 on the card. It is Fort Wayne. They play us to Eastern Michigan. Eastern Michigan, a 2.5 to a 3.5 point underdog total on this game. It is 148.5 to a 149.5, and with Fort Wayne, I did set them as a favorite of 4.5 points, so I'm going to be willing to lay up to 4 with them. With Fort Wayne, it's been a squad that has been really looking to push a little bit more tempo once again this season, and for Fort Wayne, the name of the game for them is being able to win the turnover battle. This is a team that is once again back in the top 100 in terms of their own ball security, top 50 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. Fort Wayne always going to do a bad job on the glass. They're outside the top 250 once again with regards to their rebound percentage, as I have one guy in the roster that gives you over 4 rebounds per game. That'd be Darius Duffy, 6.5 points, 5.5 boards, steal, and a block and a half per contest. But your two main guards, and DeAndre 3000 Craig, Corey Hadnot, they've been great from the outside, as Hadnot 2.5 steals, 20 points, 3 assists, shooting 41% from 3. Craig has been able to shoot 41.5% from the outside, 15.5 points per game. And then Mikhail Stevenson, who comes over from the SWAC, he's been rock solid. He's been able to give the team 14 points per game. And it's an Eastern Michigan team that doesn't necessarily do one thing great, but they're a little bit more well-rounded than they have been in the past. They bring in a pair of guys from Northwestern State that really have played well with one another in John Sanders along with Addison Patterson. Patterson is a do-it-all, 6'7", little bit of a combo player, 11.5 points, 5.5 boards, 2.5 assists. Right now shooting 42% from 3. Sanders is more of an off-the-ball scorer, 8.5 points per game, but he's only shooting 31% from 3 after he was much better than that over at Northwestern State a season ago. But Mac Manseal, who comes from within the state over in Detroit, 43% 3-point shooter, 7 points per game, but it's been all about Muhammad Habab, who has been able to give you 15.5 points, comes in from Central Michigan, 8.5 boards, 3.5 assists, steal and half per contest, a 6'9", little bit of a point forward for this team. And for Eastern Michigan, they have become a top 175 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, top 150 team in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. And for Eastern Michigan, this has become a little bit more of a controlled team. For Eastern Michigan, about 215th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. It's a Fort Wayne team that they like to play fast. They're not necessarily going to play at warp speed, but still 69th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. But I do think that the ability for Fort Wayne to be able to win the turnover battle is going to reign supreme here. I did set my line at a 4.5, so want to lay up to 4 with Fort Wayne. Set a total of 148.5, so at a 149 plus, I'm in on the under. 661, 662 on the card. It is Wisconsin, and they are on the road against Nebraska. Nebraska ball is a 1.5 point home underdog. 159.5 is the total, and I'm in on the under. I set my total at a 154. You've got some big giant home and road splits with both of these teams, and both of these teams actually scored less in this environment. For Nebraska, they're actually averaging 8.1 points more per 100 possessions away from home rather than at home. Wisconsin 36th in the country in terms of points scored on per possession basis on offense, but that falls to 162nd in terms of points per possession in a road/neutral court environment. Now, Wisconsin has done a nice job in terms of speeding themselves up. They're now actually 81st in the country in terms of total possessions per game. This is not your father's Wisconsin team. Nebraska, fast, but not overly fast. They're 125th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, but it's a Nebraska team that has been very rock solid on defense, 28th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. That goes down to 21st at home, and they have been able to do an amazing job of not allowing teams to get to the free throw line, giving out the 4th fewest free throws per possession of any defense in all of college basketball. And that's big because Wisconsin shoots over 80% of the free throw line. That's a top 10 mark in all of college basketball, and I do think that Wisconsin is going to have a tough time matching up with Rink Mass, the 6'9" sort of unicorn player, 18 points, 6 boards, 3 assists, shooting 45% from 3-point. Jamarcus Lawrence Lawrence has done a nice job being able to help out this offense with 43.5% three-point shooting, 9 points per game. Price Sanford, he knows all about the Big Ten, coming over from Iowa. He's taking 8 threes per game. He's shooting 37.5% from the outside. He's been able to supply 16 points per game, and this is a Wisconsin defense that over the last few seasons, it's not been awful, but it's still leaving something to be desired, about 96th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They've been a little bit better in terms of generating turnovers. This is a top 150 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, but that said, with Wisconsin, this is very much now an offense-oriented team with Nick Boyd and John Blackwell combining for about 41 points per game. Blackwell's been able to shoot 43% from three-point range. Wisconsin, to their credit, they've been able to do a really good job on the glass. They're a top 50 team in terms of defensive rebound percentage, top 150 team in terms of offensive rebound percentage, but not being able to get to the free throw line against this Nebraska team, I think, is going to be rough. Nolan Winter is going to be able to keep them lively on the boards, 10 boards, 13 points per game, and he's actually one of only 2 players, with the other being Blackwell, give you over 4.8 rebounds per game, but Alexis Bukauskas, hopefully I got that correct. He comes over from Lithuania. He's been able to give this team a nice shot in the arm. They've been giving him more minutes over the last 2 games, 17 points after he had in the previous 3 games 0 points, but in those games where he had 0 points, he had 4, 4, and 6 rebounds, so he's done a pretty rock solid job in terms of hitting the boards. And I do think that Wisconsin is getting a little bit more back to their roots, and I do think that with this Wisconsin team, they are a team that just doesn't execute the same way from home. So I did set Nebraska as a 2-point favorite. I like Nebraska here outright on the money line. I like the under, semi-total at a 154. 663, 664 on the card. It is Duquesne, and they're going to be on the road against Boise State, and Boise State does find themselves as a 13.5 point favor. 149.5 to 150.5 is the total, and I did set a total here of a 143.5. I do like the under. You've had a Duquesne team that's really cranked up the tempo here. In terms of total possessions per game, they are now a top 35 team in all of college basketball. As a matter of fact, they're 25th. Boise State, they're getting back to playing at a little bit more of a controlled tempo, 230th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and after Boise State was number 1 in the country in terms of defensive rebound percentage, allowing teams to grab less than 21% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound. They're not quite that supreme this year, but they're still back in the top 10. This team is not going to allow you to get a lot of second and third chances. Their main kryptonite is from the outside. They've been a top 100 team in terms of their overall rebounding, but they have been certainly outside the top 240 in terms of opponents' three-point shooting percentage. And for Boise State, they shoot about 33.5% from 3. That's country average. They've been trying to break in Dylan Andrews, who was a really nice scorer a few seasons ago over at UCLA. It's been a little bit of a work in progress as he's turned the ball over 3 times per game, but feels like it's getting better and better by the game. He's been able to give the team 13 points per contest, but in the last 3 games, he's been able to do a nice job with a combined 53 points, so you do have to give a little bit of credit there, and just 5 turnovers in those last 3 games as well. Andrew Meadow has been able to give you about 13 points per game. He shoots 44% from the outside, but I just don't think that Duquesne should be this big of an underdog. I recognize that the travel, getting out there to the great state of Idaho, is going to be a little bit much on these guys, but Terrence Gunyard has done a nice job in the backcourt, 17 points, 5 assists. He's been able to shoot about 41% from 3. The main issue for Duquesne has been the turnovers. They are outside the top 320 in terms of ball security with 15.7 turnovers per game, but John Hughley and his versatility is big. 16.6 boards, a little bit over 2 assists at like 6'8", 6'9". He's able to drain it in the mid-30s from 3. Cameron Crawford has been able to shoot 41% from 3. He's giving you 8.5 points per game, and for Duquesne, they've also been a relatively solid team on the glass, top 150 team in terms of rebound percentage, and I recognize that they're not going to win that battle down low against Boise State, but they do a nice job in terms of making their shots on the inside. They have been a top 40 team in terms of their 2-point shooting percentage. This is a Boise State group that has been outside the top 130 in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage as well, and this is not a Boise State team that's really going to press the issue. They are outside the top 225 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. I think that helps Duquesne remain lively in this game, so set a line of a 9.5. I'm going to be in on the under, and I do like the points here of Duquesne. This is the last game on the normal Las Vegas betting board before we hit the extra game. 665, 666. CSUN, Cal State Northridge plays host to Fresno State, and Fresno State is a 1.5 to a 2.5 point underdog. 154.5 to 155.5 is the total, and with CSUN made them a 2.5 point favorite, I'm going to be willing to lay the number. Fresno State has really cranked down their tempo from a season ago. Last year, Fresno State was playing at absolute warp speed. Right now for Fresno State, they are 124th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and Fresno State, to their credit, they've been a much better defensive team than they were a season ago. Right now for Fresno State, they're checking in 87th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and if you take a look only at their road/neutral court games, this is actually a top 15 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. I do think that is going to be going southward a little bit, and man, this Fresno State team has not got a lot going on offense right now. Fresno State 227th terms of points scored on a per possession basis. And for CSUN, they're outside the top 275 in terms of ball security. That has really held back their offense. 298th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. But for CSUN, they're another one of these teams with very dramatic home and road splits. They've actually been a top 125 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis when they are at home. And it's all about Larry Hughes Jr. with regards to this CSUN team, as Mr. Hughes has been Mr. Versatile, 17.5 points per contest. Right now he's shooting 47% from three. We should see a little bit of regression there, but we should see progression to the fact that CSUN, as a collective, they're only shooting 29.6% from the outside. CSUN is essentially daring you to shoot from three. They're a top 40 team in terms of percentage of opponent shots that do come from three-point range, but for CSUN, where they've been able to really shine has been on the offensive glass, top 55 team in terms of percentage of their missed shots that result in an offensive rebound. Now they're a top 20 team in terms of getting their shot blocked. They've had about 5 shots blocked per game, but that's Mohamed Fofana along with Alexander Smotrich. They've been able to do a good job in tandem of giving you combined about 13 rebounds per game. Fofana has been able to supply about 9.5 points per game, and this team, outside of Larry Hughes Jr., does not have a single player on the roster that has attempted more than 3 threes this year, shooting above 27% from three-point range. So I do think that that's going to be going northward. And for Fresno State, you do bring back one of your main guards from the season ago, who's done a nice job of headlining things in Zayon Collins, 5.5 assists, 14 points, 4 boards. He doesn't necessarily shoot it well from three. And Fresno State is right now shooting 29.7% from three. That should go northward. Jake Heidbreder has spent some time at Air Force and Clemson, 19 points per game. I do like his overall game, and this has been a Fresno State team that has been having a little bit more success on the glass. They're back in the top 200 with regards to rebound percentage, and they're doing a nice job generating turnovers. Top 100 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. They themselves are sloppy with it, though. They've been outside the top 290 in terms of their own ball security, and when you've got Wilson Jaquez down low being your main rebounder with about 7 rebounds per game and being the lone guy that gives you over 4.2 rebounds per game, that leads me to believe that CSUN is going to be able to win from within. Set CSUN as a 2.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number, and you've got a CSUN team that is very much playing with a lot of tempo right now in terms of total possessions per game. This team is number 35 in all of college basketball, so set a total of 158.5. I'm in on the over, and now we hit the extra games.
The normal betting board picks are complete, but there are some extra games today, so we go into the bonus.
306-567, 306-568. It's Norfolk State. They're going to be on the road against Baylor. Baylor's a 26.5 point favorite with a total of 145.5. I do like the under. I did set a total of a 140 for Norfolk State. They have done a nice job in terms of slowing down their tempo, 301st in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Baylor is 100th. Norfolk State really struggling on offense. How about 337th in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but they're doing a relatively solid job on defense. 82nd in terms of points allowed per possession away from home, and Baylor is 262nd in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. So this could be a little bit of a breakout for Norfolk State with Elijah Jamison, who was really good 2 seasons ago over at UW Milwaukee, providing about 4 points, 3.5 assists per game. Anthony McComb, he's come in, he's been able to give you about 16 points on 40% three-point shooting. It's a Norfolk State team that the real issue has been coming on the inside, as they have been outside the top 250 with regards to their own 2-point shooting percentage. Now, for Norfolk State, they're actually doing a really nice job on the glass. They've been a top 150 team in terms of offensive rebound percentage, so they do a nice job controlling that. And for Baylor, you can tell that this interior defense has not been great with Jocelyn Bodu dealing with a little bit of an injury. They've had to run a relatively small rotation as a result, but you got Cameron Carr and Tonde Yusufu as 6'5" do-it-all sort of players, giving you a combined 11.5 rebounds per game between the two of them, 39 points per game. And Carr, well, he's been driving it with a 44% three-point shooting percentage. Dan Skillings is a bit of a do-it-all guy that comes over from Cincinnati, 11.5 points, 8 boards, 2.5 assists. And I know I'm saying do-it-all players for Baylor, but I mean, that's really what it is. Isaac Williams gives you 10 points, 2.5 assists per game. Michael Rata, 3 assists, a steal, 9.5 points per contest. Obi Ejim, he's been able to give out 4 assists, 10.5 points, shoots in the mid-30s from 3, but I do think that with Baylor, they just aren't really finding that great identity. As of right now, Baylor has had a little bit of a tough time in terms of their defense rebound percentage. To the credit of Baylor, they've been a top 10 team in terms of percentage of their own missed shots that result in an offensive rebound, but it does feel like a little bit of a disjointed team. This is going to be a game that tips off at 11 o'clock a.m. local time, so I think there might be some sleepy guys out there. Some on line at 26, so at 26.5. Won't take the points for Norfolk State, like the under, set my total at a 140, 306, 569, 306, 570. Yale and Albany do battle from from Mass Mutual Center. Neutral court game that sees Yale as a favorite of 17 to 17.5 points. 149.5 is the total. And with Yale, I did set them as a 16.5 point favorite. So 17 plus, that does become my buy point on Albany. And this is an Albany offense that has had a tough time taking care of the ball. They're outside the top 3 in terms of ball security, and that's a big reason why they are 343rd in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. And for this Yale team, they're actually leading the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis away from home. Yale has become a very slow and controlled team. They're outside the top 320 in terms of overall possessions per game, but have a quartet of guys give you double figures, with Nick Townsend at 6'7" being the head of the Saints, 17.5 points, 7.5 boards, 4.5 assists per game. Right now shooting 55% from 3, and Yale shooting 44% from the outside. And I recognize that this is a really good 3-point shooting team for Yale. I do think that we're going to see a little bit of regression there, and Albany has been a whole heck lot better on defense than they have been on offense. That goes without saying, but that's up for this Albany team. They are about 317th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. As for this Albany group, in terms of their own 3-point shooting defense, right now they're allowing teams that shoot only about 32% from 3 away from home, so they've been able to do an okay job with that regard. Now, Yale should also be able to win the battle on the glass, with Isaac Salazar being able to give you about 5 boards, 14 points per game. Riley Fox has come on off the bench, and he's been foxy, shooting 45% from 3. He's able to supply about 13.5 points per game. And for Yale, they just keep things really efficient. They're a top 45 team in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis. And for this Albany team, it's just been a lot of transition out there in the backcourt. You've got Amir Lindsay giving you 14.5 points, 4 assists, and he's shooting 35% from 3. But I mean, outside of him, what else are you going to be able to get? You've got Okechukwu Okeke, who's been able to give you about 10 points per contest. He down low has been able to give you 6 rebounds per game. Zach Matalu has been able to give you 10 points, 5.5 rebounds per game. And to the credit of Albany, they've been a top 150 team in terms of percentage of their missed shots that result in an offensive rebound. But outside the top 300 with regards to their own 3-point shooting percentage, the biggest thing for them has been they've been relatively okay around the perimeter in terms of preventing teams from being able to bomb it from 3. And I think that that's going to be just enough for them to be able to cover. I did set a line as a result at a 16.5, so I'm going to be willing to take those points with Albany. Albany, not necessarily a team that's going to be a rocket ship themselves, who are in 33rd in terms of total possessions range, so set a total of 148.5 here at the 149 plus, like the under. 306, 571, 306, 572. UNC Asheville plays those to Miami of Ohio. Miami of Ohio, 3 to 3.5 point favorites. 152 to 152.5 is the total, and did set a line here of 3. So at 3.5, that does become my buy point on Asheville. Asheville's biggest kryptonite has been taking care of the ball. They're outside the top 300 in terms of ball security, but you do have an Asheville team that has one of the more explosive 3-point shooters in the country. Justin Wright, he has been Mr. Right at 45% 3-point shooting, and go back 2 years ago over at NC Central, he was a really good 3-point shooter there as well. 17 points, 2.5 assists, nearly 2 steals per contest for a Asheville team that has done a nice job in terms of their own 3-point shooting percentage defense as well. They're allowing teams to shoot less than 32% from the outside. They do go up against the Miami of Ohio team that last year they were a top 30 team with regards to their 3-point shooting percentage, just outside the top 50 right now. They don't do a bad job of guarding the perimeter away from them. Right now, allowing teams to shoot only about 27.5% from 3. Last year, they were about a country average team with regards to the 3-point shooting defense. So I do think that you're going to see a little bit of regression there, but I do think that both of these teams are going to be able to get some relatively good looks in a game where neither of these teams are necessarily looking to play at warp speed. Miami of Ohio, about 146th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and then with regards to North Carolina, Asheville, they've actually slowed themselves down to about 251st in the country in terms of total possessions per game, but for Asheville, they're going to allow you a lot of second and third chances. They are outside the top 300 in terms of defensive rebound percentages, despite the fact that Toya Solomon has been able to give you over 6 rebounds per game. You've got Evan Opsaro, who's actually been the main man right now for this Miami of Ohio team, 3.5 assists, 15 points per game, shooting 43.5% from 3. Peter Suter's up to shooting 52% from 3. That'll see a little bit of regression with about 12.5 points per game, but I do think that Almar Adlison, his versatility at 6'8", coming over from Bradley, giving this team 12 points and a good 3-point shooting percentage, that helps. And then you got Ian Elmore and Antoine Woolfolk in tandem down low, being able to combine for about 12.5 boards per contest, with Elmore about 8.5 points per game, 9.5 out of Woolfolk, but Woolfolk has been dealing with a little bit of injury, should be all good to go in this one. They've been having him play limited minutes over the last few games, but we should be able to see him out there on the floor, but he is right now being a little bit hampered, and with this Miami of Ohio group, they have been a top 80 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, but for this Miami of Ohio team as well, I do think that the step up in competition a little bit is going to be tough for them, and I do think that with Asheville, they drain just enough threes to be able to remain lively in this one, in a game where I do think that the offensive execution is going to be there on both sides. I did set my total at a 155. I like the over, and with Asheville, we'll take 3.5 with them, set them as a 3-point point dog. 306-573, 306-574. It's Bryant on the road against Iona. Iona is a favorite here of 10 to 10.5 points. 148.5 to 147.5 is the total. Did set a total of 148.5. I do like the over. Right now, Iona is allowing teams to shoot less than 30% from three-point range, or 39th in the country. With that regard, I do think that is going to be seeing a little bit of negative regression, and I do think that Bryant gets a little bit better on offense. Currently, they're outside the top 3 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Bryant is looking to play slow. They're 318th in the country. In terms of total possessions per game, you've got an Iona team that's looking to gun it. They're 30th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, but with that said, I did set a total here of a 148.5, so 148 or less. I'm going to be in on the over. I did set Iona, though, as a 16.5 point favorite, because I do think that Iona is going to do a nice job taking it to a Bryant punch. Has had a tough time taking care of the ball. 317th in the country in terms of turnovers per possession. Iona a top 125 team in terms of taking care of the ball, and I know that Iona doesn't sound like a ton, but they're 125th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. CJ Anthony, who comes over from Cincinnati, has been absolutely magnificent for this team, as right now he's supplying 15.5 points, 6 assists per game, and then he gets some nice help from Lamar Celebi, who's been able to give you about 13 points, 4 assists, with Anthony shooting 40% from 3. Iona as a whole is shooting about 37% from the outside. The main kryptonite for this team has been allowing second and third chances on the glass, so Bryant should be able to get a few more of those than they're accustomed to right now. Iona outside the top 3 in terms of defensive rebound percentage, but also, I have a Bryant team that's been outside the top 3 with regards to offensive rebound percentage, so that's a little bit of an issue. But for Iona, lots of clean possessions be had. Bryant is outside the top 320 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. You've had Quincy Allen do a nice job giving this Bryant team about 11 points, 4.5 boards, 2 blocks per contest, but he leads the team in rebounds. Timothy Radulski has been a do-it-all sort of player. Comes in as a 6'9", bit of a point forward from Russia with about 11.5 points, 4 boards, 2 assists. He's right now shooting 34.5% from 3 for a Bryant team that as well. They shoot 27.1% from 3. Again, with Iona allowing teams to shoot less than 30% from 3, that should see some negative regression, and we should see some positivity here for Bryant, but I just think that Iona is the far better team in this spot. And then with Iona, you on top of that have been able to get some good production out of Keyshawn Williams, who's been able to give you about 9.5 points per game. I know that they've dealt with a little bit of a injury to Kosuke Amakatu, who comes over from Santa Clara, but he should be all good to go in this one. Played limited minutes against Sacred Heart, but it looks like he should be able to give it a go here, and I do think that Iona just takes it to a Bryant team as right now in all sorts of transition after the coaching change in the offseason. I did set a line here at 16.5, willing to lay with Iona, and at a 148 or less, I am in on this total over. 306-575, 306-576. You've got New Haven on the road against NJIT. NJIT is a home underdog of 2 points. Total on this game, it is 132. I said NJIT is a 6-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the money line. This New Haven team was a sub-500 team at the Division II ranks last season, and I know that things are less than savory for NJIT. They're outside the top 3 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but they've been victimized a little bit by the fact that they have played some rough competition, and I'll give New Haven a little bit of credit. They hung in there to a single-digit game against Boston College a few days ago. They were there for all 40 minutes, but it's still a New Haven team that they themselves are well outside the top 3 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Not the world's worst defense. 222nd is New Haven's ranking in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. NJIT more on 274th, but for NJIT, they've been dealing with an injury to their top returning scorer in Sebastian Robinson. He's been able to find his sea legs. He still only give you about 7.5 points per game, but should be getting more and more comfortable by the game. I do think that for NJIT, they also do a nice job on the glass in this game as well. You've got Malachi Arrington, give you about 6 points, 5.5 rebounds per game. Ari Fulton, about 7 boards per contest as well. For NJIT, the big thing has been turnovers outside the top 330 in terms of their overall ball security, but they, over the last few years, have been above average in terms of guarding the 3-point line, and for New Haven, you just don't necessarily have a lot of guys. They're able to go bombs away from 3-point range, as Jabari Fitzpatrick has been your main man, give you about 12.5 points per game. It's a New Haven team that's outside the top 275 in terms of their 3-point shooting percentage. They're outside the top 250 in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage. To the credit of New Haven, they've been a top 275 team with regards to rebound percentage, with having Andre Pasha be able to supply 10 points, 6.5 boards, but his team is still looking for that main facilitator. Fitzpatrick is a lone guy that gives you over 2 assists per game with 2.1 assists per contest. His team is outside the top 250 in terms of ball security, and neither of these teams are really going to be looking to push a whole bunch of tempo. You've got a New Haven team that, in terms of total possessions per game, 362nd in all of college basketball. NJIT is 170th, so I do think that you get a low-scoring slog of a game here. I did set my total at a 132, as I do think that NJIT wakes up a little bit more with their offense. Right now, we're sitting on a 132, so if we could get to a 131.5 or less, I'll be in on the over. A 132.5 or higher, the under. But I think that NJIT gets a job done here. I like them on the money line, and I'm going to be willing to take a shot on a 131.5 or less to the over, 132.5 higher to the under. 306.577, 306.578. Fordham is playing us Fairleigh Dickinson. Fairleigh Dickinson hopes to be fairly priced as a 13.5 point underdog. 144.5 to a 145 is the total, and this at a total of 146.5. I do like the over. For Fairleigh Dickinson, they've added quite a bit of size here this season, but they're still a team that they play at a brisk pace. I'm not going to say that they're absolutely gunning it or anything like that, but 150th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. You got a Fordham team that is quite slow in control of Fordham right now in terms of total possessions per game, 348th, but I do think that they're going to be able to exploit a Fairleigh Dickinson team that has been grody with regards to their defense. 353rd in all of college basketball in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. And for this Fordham team, top 115 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. And big thing for Fordham has been the fact that their perimeter play has been very rock solid, as you've got a Fordham team that they're not draining it from three themselves. They're only shooting about 29.5% from the outside, but they've been a top 175 team in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis on offense. They're really not putting teams on the free throw line. Top 35 team in terms of fewest fouls allowed on a per possession basis, and it's a Fordham team that's been a top 100 team with regards to rebound percentage as well, with Rikis Schulte being able to give you 9 boards, 11.5 points per game. You've had Christian Henry step up as a main facilitator with 5.5 assists and 2.2 turnovers per game. DeJour Reeves, he was a nice go-to scorer over at Iona and Northern Colorado last year's 15.5 points, 3.5 boards, right around about 3.5 assists, a steal and a half per contest. Love what he's bringing to the table, and I just don't think that there's much of a way for Fairleigh Dickinson to be able to stay in this game. Now, Fairleigh Dickinson, they do have a little bit more size than they've had in the past, so they're not going to get as blown out on the glass when you've got someone like a Surreal Martinoff, who's been able to give you 10.5 points, 6 boards as a true 7-footer. That does help out quite a bit, but it's also a Fairleigh Dickinson team that is outside the top 330 in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage, outside the top 300 in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. They're not taking care of the ball themselves. Fairleigh Dickinson outside the top 280 in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis on offense. To their credit, they've been a top 150 team in terms of giving themselves second and third chances, but that's because they're breaking a lot of shots as well. Joy Neesman has been able to give you 9.5 points, 3.5 boards, 3 assists, and he's shooting 39% from 3, while Eric Parnell has been your main scorer, 11 points per game after he comes in from off-throw, but you can tell that Fairleigh Dickinson just doesn't quite have that same guard play that they've had in the past, and they really don't have a main go-to scorer. Now, it's a whole is greater than some of its parts approach. You've got 8 different guys between 7.5 and 11.1 points per contest, but I do think that Fordham is a much better team down low. I think that they're much better along the perimeter, and I think that Fairleigh Dickinson is going to give up a lot of open looks from 3, so set Fordham as an 18.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay it with this Fordham bunch, and I'm going to be in on the over. I set my total at a 146.5, 306.579, 306.580. Boston U is playing us to Maine. Maine hopes to not get Maine as an 8-point dog. 130.5 to 132.5 is the total. I set a total of a 128.5. I like the under. Boston U is back outside the top 350 in terms of total possessions per game. Maine is a little bit faster, but not a lot faster. 331st in terms of total possessions per game, and for Maine, they're a bottom 20 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. They have yet to exceed 65 points in a game against a Division I foe thus far this season. You've only got one player giving you over 8.1 points per game. That'd be TJ Beal. He's come over from Southeast Missouri State, 11.5 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. Shoots 35% from 3, but for Maine, they're outside the top 340 in terms of ball security, 15 turnovers per game, outside the top 320 in terms of offensive rebound percentage. You're grabbing fewer than 8 offensive rebounds per game. It's not the world's worst defense for Maine, but when you have that bad of an offense, you need to be a little bit better than 190th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Boston U is taking some massive strides back with their defense, by the way, 331st in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but Boston U still has the size to be able to absolutely dominate on the glass. They've been dealing with an injury to Otto Landrum thus far this season, but you just take a look up and down the boulevard for this Maine team. You don't have a single guy that gives you over 4.6 rebounds per game, and as a matter of fact, other than Beal, you only have one player that gives you over 3.6 rebounds per game. That'd be Ace Flag. That is the brother of Cooper Flag, who's been able to give you 4.8 points, 4.4 rebounds per game. So that's a little bit less than savory. Meanwhile, for Boston U, it's been Michael Air McNair getting the offense going, 16.5 points. He's right now shooting 56% from 3. Team as a whole shooting 41.5% from the outside. We're going to see a little bit of regression there, but I'd said for Boston U, you've got a 7-footer in Ben Defty, who should be able to control things down low, 2 blocks, 12 points, 6 rebounds per game. Andrew Bessana, he's only been able to play in 2 games when he's been out there. He's been able to give you a relatively nice shot in the arm, and that's part of the reason why the defense has been so lackluster. Not having one of your 6'8" big men out there for much of the season has really been impacting them, but that said, he's been out there over the last 2 games, so he should be able to make a little bit of an impact for this team. And then additionally, you've been able to have Ethan Owasawa be able to give you 7.5 points per contest. He's a nice 36% three-point shooter as well. Boston U, they are outside the top 225 in terms of ball security, and they'll allow you to have clean possessions. They're outside the top 3 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, but for this Boston U team, I do think that they're going to do a nice job winning from within and take it to a Maine team that just has not gotten any offense going whatsoever. It's at a total of 128.5. I like the under with Boston U. I'm willing to lay up to 10 with them. 306-581, 306-582. Colgate is on the road against St. Bonaventure. The Bonnies are an 11.5 point favorite. 139.5 to 141 is the total, and I said a total here of a 140.5, so you're at a 141 plus. I'm going to be in on the under. You've got a Bonaventure team that has done a nice job slowing things down outside the top 3 in terms of total possessions per game, and Colgate is once again playing at a relatively slow and controlled pace as well, about 224th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. For Colgate, they've got a bit more versatility than they did a season ago. You've got a 6'8" do-it-all player in Sam Wright, who's been able to give you about 13 points, 3.5 boards. Last year, he shot nearly 37% from 3. That's down to 26% from 3. We should see some positivity there. While Jalen Cox last year shot under 30% from 3, he's up to 45% from 3 this year with 50 points, 5 boards, 5.5 assists, 2 steals per contest. That'll see a little bit of negativity, but for Colgate, where they're really going to get land base, it is on the offensive glass. They're outside the top 340 in terms of percentage of their missed shots that result in an offensive rebound. They're outside the top 275 in terms of generating a turnover, so that means lots of nice, clean possessions here for the Bonnies. And for St. Bonaventure, they haven't necessarily been able to get at full force DeShante Bowen back yet, but he's been able to do a nice job facilitating 3.5 assists per game. Had a catastrophic injury that cut his season short a season ago. You can tell that he hasn't gotten back fully to what he was, but in the meantime, Daryl Buddy Simmons has been able to give you 15 points, 3 assists. He's right now shooting over 40% from 3 for a St. Bonaventure team that has been a top 75 team, shooting 37.5% from the outside, and for Bonaventure, top 125 team in terms of percentage of their missed shots. They result in an offensive rebound, and they've been a little bit better in terms of generating turnovers this year as well. They become a top 80 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. With St. Bonaventure, overall, they're about 98th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Well, this is a Colgate team that they're not allowing ridiculous percentages or anything like that, but they're about 227th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. That does improve to the top 200 away from home, so they've been a little bit better on the road. But that said, for this St. Bonaventure team, I do think that they do a nice job of controlling things down low. Frank Mitchell will give you 14.5 points, 10.5 rebounds per game, and with this bunch in St. Bonaventure, I do think that they're going to be able to do a nice job controlling the glass, but I do think that Colgate does just enough here to be able to cover. Colgate has been a pretty good team in terms of taking care of the ball as well, and with this St. Bonaventure team, they are a country average team in terms of allowing three-point shots. They're allowing teams to shoot about 33% from three-point range, and I do think that with Colgate, they should be closer to a 10 to a 10.5 point underdog, so here at 11 plus, I'm going to be willing to take those points in on the under semi-total at a 140.5. 306-583, 306-584. Houston is playing us to Jackson State. Jackson State, a pretty sizable underdog here of 38.5 to 39.5 points. 135 to 135.5 is the total. Set my line at a 37.5. At 38 plus, I'm going to be willing to take the points. And for Jackson State, the metrics are pretty much all a big giant sea of red. 363rd in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, outside the top 340 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, outside the top 330 in terms of rebound percentage. They're not doing a great job of taking care of the ball, but I just don't know if Houston is going to be able to quite win by this big of a margin, considering they're once again one of the slowest teams in all of college basketball, 292nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. You've got a Jackson State team that's relatively mid-tempo to 128th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, but that said, when it comes to this Houston bunch, they've been a little bit struggling with regards to their overall offense. They're outside the top 150 in terms of their 2-point and 3-point shooting percentage. Kingston Flemings has been very good as a freshman. He's been able to supply 5 assists, 16 points, 2 steals. He's shooting 56% from 3. That'll see a bit of regression, but Milo Suzan, who's shooting 26% from 3, that'll see some progression. So that'll balance each other out for Uzan. He's actually taken a little bit of backseat this season, 12.5 points, 4.5 assists per contest with this Houston bunch. They do a nice job taking care of the ball, fewer than 10 turnovers per game, and they're still one of the best rebound percentage teams in all of college basketball. Chris Senek Jr. give you about 8 boards, 9.5 points per game. It's not the same team that we've seen in the past as the only other player that's given you over 4 4 rebounds per game is Joseph Tugler, 8 points, 5 rebounds per game, and I think that could be just enough for Jackson State to be able to hold in there because Jackson State is just getting absolutely railroaded on the glass. Man, these guys are not hitting the boards whatsoever, as you have one player that's giving you over 3.5 rebounds per game. That'd be Jamie Mitchell as a guard, 13.5 points, 4 boards per contest for the Jackson State team. They are turning the ball over about 15 times per game, but they've been able to find a little bit more offense recently. Deshaun Ruffin, who was actually a starter over at Ole Miss a few seasons ago, give you about 15.5 points per game. What has really been hurting them is a whole bunch of injuries, but now you've got DeAndre Thomas, who was one of their main transfers coming over from McNeese Southern at 6'8". He came back in their most recent games. And should be able to give them a little bit of a shot in the arm. One of their main starters from a season ago, Kavion Hunt, he still remains out of the fold, but at the very least, it looks like this team is getting a little bit healthier. And Mike Williams has been able to give you a bit more of something as a freshman as well. He had 12 points in their most recent game against Tennessee State. He was able to give the team 5 boards. And for the Jackson State team, the defense has been a little bit better recently. I recognize that they gave up the 88 points to Kennesaw State, go Owls, but they do give up 45 to Louisiana. This is a team that's given up 80 points or fewer. It doesn't sound like much in 2 out of their last 3 games. And for Jackson State, I do think that they do just enough to hold in there against a Houston team that's going to make this very grimy, very slow, and I do think that the Houston defense going to be more dominant than the offense. Set a line of a 37.5. You're at 38 plus. I'm going to be willing to take those points, and with regards to total, I'm in on the under. Set my total at a 133.5, 36.585, 36.586. Arkansas Pine Bluff, they're on the road against Tulsa. Tulsa's a 22 to 22.5 point favorite. 156.5 to a 157 is the total line. For Tulsa, I did set them as a favorite of 23.5 points, so I'm going to be willing to lay up to 23 with them. And Pine Bluff, to their credit, they actually have been playing some much better basketball here over the last week. Their road trip to Chicago was very fruitful. They knock off Illinois Chicago in a 1-point game. They hold in there to a 4-point loss against DePaul, and Keon Williams is a very underrated player. He's doing it all. 16 points, 6.5 boards, 4.5 assists. He was the top scorer over at Abilene Christian a season ago. Not a great 3-point shooter, and Arkansas Pine Bluff as a whole outside the top 320 with their 3-point shooting percentage at 29.2%. They themselves have not played great defense. They are well outside the top 330 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and this is not going to be a team that's going to be monsters of the midway on the glass outside the top 300 in terms of rebound percentage. And for Pine Bluff, they have cranked themselves up a little bit more. They're back up to the top 50 in terms of total possessions per game, and you got a Tulsa team that has really been able to do a nice job, come together on offense, a top 75 unit in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but aren't 41st in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. While they've actually really slowed themselves down, they're outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game, and part of it is bringing in a guy from St. Thomas and Miles Barnstable, who's been really good, 14 points, 4.5 boards. He's right now shooting 44.5% from the outside. Tulsa as a whole, they shoot 38% from 3, top 50 team in terms of ball security with fewer than 10 turnovers per game, and they're a top 75 team with their 2-point shooting percentage as well. Miles Rigsby, who comes over from Troy, versatility is great with him, 9 points, a steal and a half, 3 assists per game. David Green, he was the main scorer over at Rhode Island a season ago at 6'6". Last year shot 41.5% from 3. That's down to about 31.5% this season, but should be going northward. We've seen him shoot it a little bit better recently, 14.5 points, 5 boards per game, and then you've got Romad Dean and Ian Smichael, who aren't really giving you a lot of scoring between the two of them, about 12.5 points per game, but they both supply 4.8 rebounds per game to allow this team to really dominate the class. Tulsa's been a top 75 team in terms of rebound percentage, and big issue that right now you've got for Pine Bluff is that you just don't have guys that are really pounding the boards. Outside of Keon Williams, only Jaquan Scott gives you more than 5 rebounds per game, 14.6 rebounds per game, and these two guys are rock solid, but I mean, it's a very top-heavy team right now with Pine Bluff that is looking to generate some turnovers, but it's not having a lot of success with it. So what Tulsa did set them as a 23.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay it, and did set my total at a 155.5, so a 156 plus in on the under. 306.587, 306.588. Battle of East. Eastern Kentucky is on the road against Eastern Illinois. Eastern Illinois is finding themselves as between a 3 to a 5-point home underdog. 151.5 to a 154 is the total, so we are seeing a wide range of numbers here, and I did set a total here of a 146.5. I'm going to be in on the under. You've got an Eastern Kentucky team that they always like to play with quite a bit of pace. Eastern Kentucky back number 50 in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Eastern Illinois, though, they're about 256th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and what should be the forte of this Eastern Illinois team is defense, and right now they're 334th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They're actually giving up 31.9 points fewer per 100 possessions at home rather than away from home. That's obviously a number that is going to be changing a little bit as the season goes along. Small sample size, and for Eastern Kentucky, they're outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis as well, but for Eastern Kentucky, not like this has been some some sort of a offensive locomotive or anything like that. Right now, they're about 200th in the country in terms of their three-point shooting percentage. They shoot about 33% as a collective. Juan Cranford, who comes over from St. Francis, Pennsylvania, he's been your main man, 12.5 points, shooting over 40% from three-point shot. Matavius Myrick has been given the team nice versatility, 7 boards, 11 points per game, doesn't really shoot it from three-point range, but he gives you a block per contest, and this has been an Eastern Kentucky team that has been a top 125 team in terms of shot blocking, and Eastern Kentucky's main forte is actually their second and third chances. They're a top 75 team in terms of percentage of their missed shots that result in an offensive rebound, and for Eastern Illinois, what I do like about this team is what you're able to get out of Cooper Jacoby. Jacoby has been in the program for quite a few years, 6'6", a little bit of a combo player, shooting right around about 23% from three this year. Last year, that was well above 30%, so I think that there's going to be some positivity there. 11 points, 5.5 boards, 2.5 assists per game. Zion Fruster, he was their main man from the season ago, give you about 16.5 points per game. Eastern Illinois, under the tutelage of Marty Simmons, has been a good team in terms of generating turnovers. Not quite as much of that this year. They're currently outside the top 225 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, but they're allowing teams to shoot only about 32% from three. In Eastern Kentucky, they're in the top 40 in the country in terms of percentage of their shots that come from three-point range, and have an Eastern Illinois team that's just well outside the top 3 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. They're shooting less than 28% from three. They're outside the top 3 in terms of their 2-point shooting percentage. They're a middle-of-the-road team in terms of their free throw shooting percentage, so that's very good, but it's not like this has been an Eastern Kentucky team that they themselves have been necessarily batting down the hatches with regards to their scoring as well. It's better than what Eastern Illinois is. Eastern Illinois 345th in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but Eastern Kentucky, they themselves about 237th, so I think that you get a little bit of a lower scoring slog of a game. I did have to set Eastern Kentucky here as the 2.5 point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to take the points with Eastern Illinois, not so much the money line, and did set a total here of a 146.5. I'm in on the under, 365.89, 365.90. Texas State plays those to Southern, and Southern does find themselves as a underdog of 2.5 points, 137.5 to 139.5 is the total. I did set a line of a 6.5. I'm going to be willing to lay it with Texas State. You just have a Southern team that I don't think is going to be able to stand up to this Texas State team down low. For Southern, right now they are 341st in terms of points per possession allowed on defense and 309th in terms of defensive rebound percentage. Teams are grabbing 33.8% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound, and for Texas State right now they are 56th in all of college basketball in terms of their overall rebound percentage, and Texas State is looking to pile drive the ball down low. They are number 1 in the country in terms of percentage of their shots that come from 2-point range. Over 56.5% of their shots do. And for Southern, they're outside the top 215 in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. And Texas State actually doesn't shoot it bad from three. They shoot 34% from the outside. That's right around about country average. DJ Hall has been the main man. He and Mark Drone both give you about 12.5 points per game. Hall is able to give you 7.5 boards. That's 2.5 assists per game. Meanwhile, you've got Dimp Purnell, who's been able to give you about 40% three-point shooting, 8.5 points per game, and is very much a whole is greater than some of its parts sort of collective right now with this Texas State team, as they've got essentially 10 different guys. They're seeing at least 9.9 minutes per game. That includes Jalen Bolden, who comes over from Louisiana Monroe, being quite a bit of disappointment, only about 4.5 points per game after he was a nice double-figure scorer for Monroe over the last few seasons, but Caden Gums, he's been able to give you 4 assists to about 2 turnovers per game. Texas State does need to do a better job of taking care of the ball. They're outside the top 3 in terms of ball security with about 14 turnovers per game, but they're a top 75 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis as well. This is a Texas State team that is about 286th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and Southern's looking to fly. Southern is a top 20 team in terms of total possessions per game, and the one thing that this Southern team has been able to do has been generating turnovers, as last year they were actually a top 40 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. Not quite there this year. They're more around about 235th, but for Southern, this was last year a team where they were very much like Texas State, where the whole was greater than the sum of its parts. Now you've got a few main guys that are looking to just really carry the mail for Southern, most notably Michael Jacobs, who's been able to give you 21.5 points, right around about 3.5 assists, shooting 40% from 3-point. Blake Abjewald, he comes over from UMass. He's been able to give you 10 points, 8 rebounds per game. One of just 2 guys are giving you above 3.7 rebounds per game, with the other being Damari Jones, who's been able to supply about 10.5 points, 6.5 rebounds per game. Jones has been dealing with a little bit of injury, was able to return in that game against Texas, 7 points, 5 boards, played limited minutes, so he should be good to go in this one, but it is a Southern team that I do think that they're going to have a lot of difficulty on the glass with Texas State, and I do think that Texas State wins from within. Set my line at 6.5. I'm going to be one to lay the number, and like the over, set my total 142.5, and wrap things up with 306.591, 306.592. San Diego State, they play us Lamar. Lamar is an underdog of 18.5 to 19.5 points, 135.5 to 137.5 is the total line for San Diego State. I set them as a 21.5 point favorite. I'm going to be one to lay it. with Lamar. This squad has been really cranking down their tempo, and they're a little bit more defense-oriented under the tutelage of Alvin Brooks. Right now, they are about 314th, Lamar is, in terms of total possessions per game. San Diego State is actually 73rd in terms of total possessions per game. A little bit of that is a warped stat. They play the double overtime game against Troy, but I have found that San Diego State, they like to play up-tempo in non-conference play, and then once conference play comes around, they all of a sudden slow it back down because they try to speed it up every single year, and every single year they realize it's a bad idea. You've got Reese Dixon Waters along BJ Davis combining for about 25 points per game for San Diego State, with Davis right now shooting 47.5% from three, and San Diego State is shooting 40% from three. We will see that tick down a little bit, in my opinion, and San Diego State is allowing a lot of second and third chances. They're outside the top 275 in terms of defensive rebound percentage, but much of that came without Magoon Gwath. He's now back in the fold. He's given the team a block and a half, 9.5 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. As a matter of fact, the lone guy on the roster that's giving you over 5 rebounds per game, that'd be Miles Heide, 5.4 rebounds per game. I do think that this improves as the season goes along, and Darrell Harrington has been able to do a nice job supplying the goods with about 9.5 points per game. And then on the Lamar side of things, they did lose quite a few guys by the transfer portal in the offseason, but you do bring back someone like a Cody Penbaker who's been able to give you about 8 points per game. I like the game of Andrew Holyfield, 13.5 points, 6 boards at 6'9" shoots about 36% from three-point range, and Lamar as a whole, they shoot about 32% from the outside. They just have no ability to get to the free throw line. They're outside the top 320 in terms of percentage of their possessions that result in a free throw. Now, this has also been a Lamar team that has been actually quite good in terms of generating turnovers. In terms of turnovers force on a per possession basis, this Lamar group is number 43 in all of college basketball. And San Diego State has actually been much better, even with their interior play regressing in terms of generating turnovers. They're 41st in the country with this regard. And for Lamar, top 75 team in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. They're a relatively country average team in terms of being able to guard the 3-point line as well. So I do think that San Diego State going to start to throttle down a little bit, but you've been dealing with the Bryant Knight injury for this bunch in Lamar as well. He's one of the main guards that returns from a season ago, but you've had Rob Lee Jr. give you about 14 points per game. That said, this is a Lamar squad that it does feel like the offense is still leaving quite a bit something to be desired, and really other than when they've been facing off against Division II teams, they have been unable to get past the 70-point plateau, and I do think that this is going to be a game that's going to be a little bit lower scoring, that San Diego State just uses their size to muscle out. I set my line at 21.5. I'm going to be willing to lay with San Diego State. I did set a 12, 137.5, so here at the 136.5, I do like the over, and that'll wrap things up for the Wednesday edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSIN family of podcasts. A big thanks to Ben Stevens. He does great work here at VSIN. He joined me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, large ZM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, and I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, give you picks and analysis on every game, every day, so I will be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you so much.